The cowboy's heart had turned to stone until she cried in his arms and cracked it open. This is the story of Caleb Redden, a man who'd forgotten how to feel, and Anna Grayson, the woman who taught him to live again. What happens when a bounty hunter with nothing left to lose meets a schoolteacher fighting to save her dying brother? Stay with me until the end of this tale and leave a comment with your city so I can see how far this story has traveled. Now, let me take you back to the restless summer of 1876. The dust rose in lazy spirals behind Caleb Redden's horse as he rode into Redemption Creek on that sweltering June afternoon. The town sat in a shallow valley between the Montana hills like a collection of broken promises, weathered storefronts, a crooked church steeple, and a saloon that never seemed to close. The kind of place where people came to disappear, and Caleb Redden had become very good at disappearing. He was 32 years old, though his eyes carried 50 years of hard living. Tall and lean, with shoulders that had learned to carry weight they were never meant to bear, he sat his horse with the easy grace of a man who'd spent more time in the saddle than in his own bed. His face was all sharp angles and weathered planes, carved by wind and sun, and things he tried hard not to remember. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a gift from a knife fight in Abilene 3 years back. His hair, dark as a crow's wing, hung past his collar, and a week's worth of stubble shadowed his face. But it was his eyes that told the real story. Gray as winter storm clouds, they held the peculiar emptiness of a man who'd stopped expecting anything from the world and had trained the world to expect nothing from him. Those eyes had watched men die, had pulled triggers that ended lives, had closed against memories that still woke him in the night, gasping and reaching for a pistol that was always within arm's reach. The prisoner he'd brought in, a cattle rustler named Dutch Morrison, sat slumped in his saddle, hands bound, face battered from 5 days of hard riding and one ill-advised escape attempt. Caleb had caught him outside of Billings, tracked him through 3 counties, and finally ran him to ground in a line shack where the fool had stopped to sleep. The fight had been brief and brutal, ending with Dutch face down in the dirt and Caleb's Colt pressed against the back of his skull. "Welcome to Redemption Creek," Dutch muttered through split lips as they rode down the main street. "Town's got a sense of humor, naming itself that." Caleb didn't respond. He'd learned long ago that silence was easier than conversation, safer than connection. Words led to questions, questions led to stories, and stories led to the kind of vulnerability that got a man killed, or worse, made him remember he was still human. The sheriff's office stood at the end of the street, a squat building with bars on the windows and a hitching post that had seen better days. Sheriff Tom Bridger stepped out onto the porch as they approached, a heavy-set man in his 50s with kind eyes and a badge that actually meant something in this part of the territory. "Caleb Redden," Bridger called out, his voice carrying a warmth that Caleb didn't return. "Heard you were tracking Dutch. Figured you'd run him down eventually." "Eventually came 5 days ago," Caleb said, swinging down from his horse. His boots hit the packed earth with a solid thud, and he reached up to haul Dutch down with less ceremony than the man might have hoped for. "He's all yours, Sheriff, alive, like the warrant specified." "Barely," Dutch groaned, stumbling as Caleb shoved him toward the office door. "Barely's what the warrant called for," Caleb replied flatly. Bridger chuckled and took custody of the prisoner, leading him inside to one of the cells that lined the back wall. Caleb followed, his spurs jingling with each step, a sound he'd grown so accustomed to that he barely heard it anymore. The office smelled of coffee and tobacco and the particular staleness of a place where men spent too much time waiting for something to happen. "Payment's the usual," Bridger said, unlocking the cell and pushing Dutch inside. $500 plus expenses if you got receipts." "Don't keep receipts. Didn't figure you did." Bridger locked the cell door and turned to face Caleb, studying him with the kind of careful attention that made Caleb's shoulders tense. "You look like hell, son. When's the last time you slept in a real bed?" "Don't remember." "When's the last time you slept at all?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "You got my money, Sheriff, or are we going to stand here discussing my sleeping habits?" Bridger sighed and moved to the battered desk that dominated the small office. He pulled a strongbox from the bottom drawer, counted out $500 in paper money and coins, and slid it across the desk. "You planning to stay in town a few days, rest up before the next hunt?" "Planning to collect my money and ride out." It's near sundown, Caleb. Even you got to admit that riding out in the dark after 5 days of hard travel ain't the smartest. I'll manage. Stubborn as a Missouri mule, Bridger muttered, but there was no real heat in it. He'd known Caleb for 3 years now, long enough to recognize a lost cause when he saw one. At least get yourself a drink and a meal before you go. The saloon's got a new cook. Woman makes a steak that'll make you weep. Caleb pocketed the money without counting it. Bridger was honest, one of the few lawmen in the territory who could make that claim. Maybe. That's more than I usually get out of you. Bridger leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. You know, there's talk of expanding the territorial marshal service. They're looking for good men, men with your particular skills. Pays steady, you'd have some backup when you need it, and not interested. Didn't think you would be, but figured I'd mention it. Bridger pulled a cigar from his vest pocket and lit it, the smoke curling up toward the ceiling. You can't run forever, son. Caleb's hand was already on the door handle. Watch me. He stepped out into the evening heat, pulling the door shut behind him with more force than necessary. The sun was sinking toward the western hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded him of fire, and fire reminded him of things he'd rather forget. He stood on the porch for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the changing light, his hand resting unconsciously on the butt of his Colt. The street was busier now, people emerging from their homes and shops as the worst of the day's heat began to fade. A group of miners laughed outside the assay office, counting their earnings. 2 women in respectable dresses walked arm in arm toward the general store, their voices carrying on the still air. A dog barked somewhere, and a child's laughter rang out from between 2 buildings. Normal life, the kind Caleb had stopped believing in. He untied his horse, a bay gelding named Rust, because of the color, and because everything in Caleb's life eventually turned to rust anyway, and led him toward the livery stable. The animal needed rest and feed more than Caleb needed to ride out into the gathering darkness. Bridger had been right about that much, even if Caleb wouldn't give him the satisfaction of admitting it. The livery was run by an old Mexican named Santos, who asked few questions and gave good care to the animals that came through his doors. He nodded to Caleb, took Rust's reins, and led the gelding to a stall without needing to be told what was required. Caleb paid for 2 days' stabling, then stepped back out into the street. The saloon beckoned. The lucky strike, according to the faded sign that hung crooked above the door. It was the kind of establishment that existed in every frontier town. Rough-hewn boards, bat-wing doors, the promise of whiskey, and temporary oblivion. Caleb had been in 100 places just like it, from Texas to the Canadian border, and they all blurred together in his memory like whiskey-soaked dreams. He pushed through the doors into smoke and noise and the particular smell of men who worked hard and drank harder. The interior was what he expected, a long bar running down one side, tables scattered across a sawdust-covered floor, a staircase leading up to rooms he had no interest in visiting. A piano sat silent in one corner, and a handful of men played cards at a table near the back. The bartender, a thick-necked man with a scar through one eyebrow, looked up as Caleb approached. "What'll it be?" "Whiskey. Leave the bottle." Money changed hands. A glass appeared, then a bottle of amber liquid that was probably more raw alcohol than actual whiskey, but Caleb didn't care. He poured, drank, and felt the familiar burn slide down his throat and settle in his chest like an old friend. He poured again. "You're reddin'," a voice said from his left. Caleb turned his head slowly. The speaker was a young man, maybe 22 or 23, with the kind of eager face that hadn't learned disappointment yet. He wore a gun on his hip with the careful pride of someone who wanted people to notice. "I am," Caleb acknowledged, turning back to his drink. "Heard you're the best tracker in the territory. Heard you brought in the Drummond gang single-handed. Heard you once tracked a man across 300 miles of desert and—" "You heard wrong," Caleb interrupted, his voice flat. "I'm just a man who's good at following tracks. Nothing special about it." "But you've killed—" "Enough." Caleb's hand moved toward his gun, not threateningly, just enough to make the young man's eyes widen. "I'm not here to swap stories or make friends. I'm here to drink in peace. You want to be a gunfighter? Go find someone else to admire. You want to stay alive, forget everything you've heard, and go back to whatever honest work your mama raised you for." The young man's face flushed red. Whether from embarrassment or anger, Caleb didn't know and didn't care. He watched as the kid retreated to a table in the corner, shooting dark looks in Caleb's direction that would have been dangerous if the kid had possessed an ounce of the skill his pride suggested. Caleb poured another drink. The whiskey was already starting to work, softening the edges of the world, making everything a bit more distant, a bit less real. This was what he needed. This numbness, this blessed absence of feeling. He'd learned years ago that feeling things was dangerous. Feel too much joy, and you'd eventually feel crushing sorrow. Feel too much love, and you'd eventually feel devastating loss. Feel too much hope, and you'd eventually feel soul-destroying despair. Better to feel nothing at all. "Excuse me, sir, but I need to speak with Mr. Patterson." The voice cut through the saloon's din like a bell through fog, clear, educated, utterly out of place. Caleb looked up from his glass to see a woman standing at the bar, speaking to the bartender with a mixture of determination and barely concealed desperation. She was perhaps 26 or 27, with honey-colored hair pinned up in a style that belonged back east, not in a Montana saloon. She wore a simple gray dress that had seen better days, the fabric worn but clean, the hem let out and re-sewn more than once. But it was her face that caught his attention, delicate features marked by exhaustion, eyes the color of a clear summer sky that held too much worry for someone so young. "Mrs. Grayson," the bartender, apparently Patterson, said with exaggerated patience, "I already told you this morning I can't extend your credit anymore. You've already owed me for 3 weeks." "It's Miss Grayson," she corrected quietly, her hands clasped so tightly together that her knuckles showed white. "And I'm not asking for charity, Mr. Patterson. I'm asking for basic human decency. My brother is very ill. The medicine Dr. Harrison prescribed costs $12, and I simply don't have—" "Not my problem." Patterson cut her off, his voice hardening. "You want medicine, you pay for it. You want credit, you show me you're good for it. Teaching school don't pay enough to cover what you already owe, and I got a business to run." Caleb watched her face as the words hit home. He saw the way her jaw tightened, the way her eyes suddenly glistened with tears she absolutely refused to let fall. She was fighting to maintain her composure, fighting to keep her dignity, fighting against circumstances that were clearly overwhelming her. "Please," she said, and the single word carried so much weight that even Patterson looked uncomfortable. "Jacob is only 12 years old. He has a fever that won't break, and Dr. Harrison says without the proper medicine, the infection in his lungs could—" Her voice cracked just for a moment before she forced it steady again. "I'm begging you." "Can't help you, miss," Patterson said, though he at least had the grace to look away as he said it. "Now, I got other customers to tend to." She stood there for a moment longer, her whole body trembling with the effort of not breaking down in front of everyone in the saloon. Then she turned, moving toward the door with her back straight and her head high, even as Caleb saw a single tear escape down her cheek. Something stirred in his chest, something he hadn't felt in so long that he barely recognized it. A flicker of, what? Anger? Sympathy? The ghost of a memory that maybe, once upon a time, he'd been the kind of man who would have done something about a scene like the one he'd just witnessed. He crushed the feeling ruthlessly, drowned it in another slug of whiskey. Not his problem, not his business. He'd learned long ago that getting involved in other people's troubles was the fastest way to acquire troubles of your own, and he had more than enough ghosts haunting him already. The woman, Miss Grayson, pushed through the saloon doors and disappeared into the street beyond. The noise of the saloon resumed its normal rhythm, the moment already forgotten by everyone except Caleb, who stared into his whiskey glass and saw her face reflected there, saw the tears she'd fought so hard to contain. 12 years old, he thought, and immediately wished he hadn't. He'd been 12 years old once, a lifetime ago in Virginia before the war had torn everything apart. He remembered being 12 and sick with fever while his mother sat by his bed, cool cloth pressed to his forehead, her voice soft as she sang old hymns and promised everything would be all right. He remembered being 12 and believing her, because mothers didn't lie about things like that. He poured more whiskey, trying to wash the memory away. "Sad case, that," the bartender said, moving back down the bar to where Caleb sat. "The Grayson woman. Came to town 4 months ago from Boston, took the teaching job at the school. Brought her little brother with her, just the two of them. Kid's been sick near about 2 weeks now. Harrison says it's pneumonia, maybe worse." Caleb didn't ask, but Patterson seemed inclined to talk anyway. "She's dead broke," he continued, wiping down the bar with a rag that might have been white once. "School board pays her $18 a month, and she sends half of it back east to pay off her father's debts. The old man died owing money all over Boston, left her with nothing but the responsibility for her brother. She's too proud to ask for real help, too stubborn to give up, and too damn noble for her own good." "Why are you telling me this?" Caleb asked, his voice rough. Patterson shrugged. "No reason. Just making conversation." He paused, studying Caleb with shrewd eyes. "Though I did see the way you looked at her, figured maybe there was still some human feeling in that stone heart of yours." "You figured wrong," Caleb said flatly. "Probably did," Patterson agreed, moving away to serve another customer. Caleb sat at the bar for another hour, working his way through the bottle with methodical determination. But no matter how much he drank, he couldn't seem to stop seeing her face. Those blue eyes filled with desperate hope, that single tear escaping despite her best efforts, the way she'd held herself together even as her world was clearly falling apart. He thought about the brother, 12 years old and fighting for his life, while his sister begged strangers for money to save him. He thought about being 12 and sick and scared and having someone who loved you enough to fight for you, even when the fight seemed hopeless. He thought about a lot of things he'd spent 10 years trying not to think about. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, pushing away from the bar. The bartender looked up. "You leaving already? Bottle's only half gone." "Keep it," Caleb said, tossing some coins on the bar. "And I need to know something. Where does Miss Grayson live?" Patterson's eyebrows rose. "What's it to you?" "Just answer the question." "Little cabin at the east edge of town, past the church. Can't miss it. Only one out that way with a green door." Patterson leaned forward, his voice dropping. "You planning something stupid, Redden?" "Probably," Caleb admitted, already moving toward the door. The evening had cooled considerably. The sky, now deep purple, shot through with the first stars. Caleb stood on the saloon porch for a moment, breathing in air that didn't taste of smoke and whiskey, trying to convince himself to mount Rust and ride out of town like he'd planned. But his feet carried him east instead, past the church with its crooked steeple, past darkened houses where families sat down to supper, past the schoolhouse where Miss Grayson presumably spent her days trying to teach children who probably didn't appreciate the education she was fighting so hard to provide. The cabin appeared exactly as Patterson had described, small, weathered, with a green door that looked like it had been recently painted, probably by Miss Grayson herself. Lamplight glowed in the single window, and as Caleb approached, he could hear the low murmur of voices from inside. He stood on the small porch, his hand raised to knock, wondering what the hell he thought he was doing. This wasn't his problem. This wasn't his business. He'd spent 10 years deliberately avoiding situations exactly like this. Situations where someone needed help, where getting involved meant risking the kind of connection that led to pain. But before he could talk himself out of it, before he could turn and walk away, the door opened. Miss Grayson stood in the doorway, her face pale in the lamplight, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw who was standing on her porch. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched into her features, the shadows under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the doorframe. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice wary. She'd probably learned to be careful of strange men appearing at her door, especially in a frontier town where women living alone were vulnerable in ways men never had to consider. "Heard you needed medicine for your brother," Caleb said, the words coming out rougher than he'd intended. "Heard it cost $12. Her back straightened, pride warring with desperation across her face. "I don't need charity from strangers, Mr. Redden. Caleb Redden. And I'm not offering charity." "Then what are you offering?" Good question. What was he offering? He reached into his pocket, felt the weight of the money he'd collected from Sheriff Bridger, and pulled out $15. He held it out to her. "I'm offering a loan," he heard himself say. $12 for the medicine, 3 extra in case your brother needs anything else. You can pay me back when the school board pays you next, or whenever you're able. No interest, no pressure. She stared at the money like it might bite her. "Why?" "Does it matter?" "Yes," she said firmly. "It matters a great deal." "I don't know you, Mr. Redden. I don't know why a complete stranger would offer to loan me money and forgive me if I'm suspicious of kindness from men I've never met. Fair enough. He'd be suspicious too, if their positions were reversed. He lowered his hand but didn't put the money away. I was in the saloon when you talked to Patterson, he said. I heard what you said about your brother. I've got the money. You need it. And he paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound weak or sentimental. And I knew someone once who'd have done the same for me if I'd needed it. Consider it paying forward a debt I never got to repay. She studied his face, and he had the uncomfortable sensation of being seen, really seen, for the first time in years. Those blue eyes seemed to look past the scar and the stubble and the carefully maintained walls, right down to something he'd thought long dead. Anna, she said finally, my name is Anna Grayson. Caleb read in. You already said that. The ghost of a smile touched her lips, there and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. She looked at the money again, and he could see the internal battle playing out across her face. Pride against pragmatism, independence against her brother's desperate need. Please, Caleb said quietly, and was surprised to hear the word come from his own mouth. He didn't say please, didn't ask, didn't plead. But somehow this felt different. Let me help. Anna's eyes filled with tears, and this time she didn't try to hide them. He's all I have left, she whispered. Our parents are gone. Our family home is gone. Everything is gone except him. If I lose Jacob... She couldn't finish the sentence. You won't, Caleb said with more certainty than he felt. Take the money, get the medicine, help him fight. She took the bills from his hand slowly, as if they might vanish if she moved too quickly. Her fingers brushed his, and he was startled by the warmth of her touch, by the reminder that skin could be warm, that human contact could be something other than violence. Thank you, she said, her voice breaking. I don't know how to thank you properly, but don't, he interrupted. Don't thank me, just help your brother. She nodded, clutching the money to her chest. Would you like to come in? I have coffee, and it's the least I can offer. No, he said, perhaps too quickly. He saw hurt flash across her face and softened his tone. I need to go, just take care of yourself, Miss Grayson. Anna, she corrected, if you're going to be my creditor, you should at least call me by my name. Anna, he repeated, and the name felt strange on his tongue, too personal, too intimate, too much like the beginning of something he absolutely couldn't afford. He turned to leave, his boots heavy on the wooden porch, already regretting his impulse. He'd broken his own rule, gotten involved, allowed himself to care even for a moment about someone else's troubles. It was weakness, and weakness got you killed in his line of work. Mr. Redden. He stopped, but didn't turn around. The coffee offer stands, Anna said softly. Tonight or any night. I'd like to properly thank the man who may have just saved my brother's life. Caleb stood frozen for a heartbeat, torn between the desperate need to run and the dangerous desire to stay. Finally, without looking back, he said, Maybe, and walked into the gathering darkness. But as he made his way back to the saloon to reclaim what was left of his whiskey, he knew that maybe was a lie. He'd given her the money, done his good deed, and now the smart thing, the only thing, was to collect his horse tomorrow morning and ride out of Redemption Creek, never to return. He'd forget about Anna Grayson and her sick brother. He'd forget about those blue eyes and that single tear and the way she'd looked at him like he might actually be something more than the cold-hearted bounty hunter the world believed him to be. He'd forget, just like he'd forgotten everything else that might make him feel human. Except, as he lay in a rented bed above the saloon that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the town settling into sleep, Caleb Redding discovered that some things, some people, weren't as easy to forget as he'd hoped. Her face kept appearing in his mind. Her voice echoed in his memory, and somewhere in his chest, in that place he'd worked so hard to turn to stone, something stirred to life that felt dangerously like hope. He cursed softly in the darkness, pulled the thin blanket over his head, and tried to will himself to sleep. Tomorrow he'd ride out. Tomorrow he'd get back to his real life, the life that made sense, the life that didn't require feeling things or caring about school teachers with dying brothers. Tomorrow, he'd be the man he'd spent 10 years becoming, hard, cold, alone. But tonight, just for tonight, He allowed himself to remember what it felt like to do something good, to help someone who needed helping, to see gratitude and hope in someone's eyes instead of fear or contempt. Tonight, he allowed himself to wonder what it might be like to be the kind of man who could accept Anna Grayson's offer of coffee, who could sit in that cabin and have a conversation like a normal human being, who could maybe, just maybe, remember how to feel something other than emptiness. But when morning came, those thoughts would be packed away with the darkness, and Caleb Redden would ride out of Redemption Creek, leaving behind whatever foolish softness the night had brought. That was the plan anyway. The universe, as it often did, had other ideas entirely. But morning didn't bring the clean break Caleb had promised himself. Instead, it brought the sound of urgent footsteps on the stairs outside his room, followed by a sharp knock that jerked him from uneasy dreams of blue eyes and stone hearts cracking open. "Redden!" Sheriff Bridger's voice carried through the thin door. "Need you downstairs now!" Caleb rolled out of bed, his hand finding his Colt before his feet hit the floor, instinct born from too many years of waking up to trouble. He dressed quickly, splashed water on his face from the basin, and descended the narrow stairs to find Bridger waiting in the saloon's main room, his face grave in the early morning light. "What is it?" Caleb asked, noting the way the sheriff's hand rested on his gun belt. "Stagecoach got hit yesterday evening, about 15 miles north of here. 3 men, masks, took the strongbox and shot the driver. He made it back to town an hour ago, barely alive. Says one of the robbers had a distinctive scar, lightning bolt shaped down his left arm. Know anyone matching that description?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "Jack Hollister. Rides with 2 brothers, both mean as snakes. They working this territory now?" "Appears so. Driver says they headed into the hill country, probably planning to hole up until the heat dies down." Bridger fixed Caleb with a steady look. "I know you were planning to leave this morning, but I need your tracking skills. The strongbox had payroll for the mining company, near about $2,000. I can offer you 10% if you help bring them in. $200 for a few days' work. It was good money, better than most bounties." But more than that, Jack Hollister and his brothers were the kind of men who'd kill without hesitation, who'd rob again if they weren't stopped, who'd leave more wounded drivers bleeding out on mountain roads. Caleb thought about riding out, leaving this town and its problems behind. Then he thought about Anna Grayson's face when she'd taken that money, about her brother fighting for his life, about the $15 that now left him shorter than he'd planned to be. 20%, he heard himself say. Bridger's eyebrows rose. "That's steep. That's my price for staying when I'd planned to leave." A moment's consideration, then a nod. "Done. $400 if you bring back the money and the men. When can you leave?" "Give me an hour to get my horse ready and gather supplies." Caleb paused. "You coming with me?" "Can't. Got Dutch Morrison to transport to the territorial prison tomorrow, and I'm the only law in this town. I can deputize you if you want. Don't bother. I work better alone anyway." He did work better alone. Had for 10 years. Being alone meant not having to worry about anyone else, not having to trust anyone else, not having to watch anyone else die because he'd made a mistake or moved too slow or cared too much. An hour later, Caleb sat astride Rust at the edge of town, saddlebags packed with provisions, Winchester rifle secure in its scabbard, and the familiar weight of solitude settling over him like an old coat. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist, and he was just about to turn north toward the hill country when a figure emerged from the direction of the church. Anna Grayson walked toward him with purposeful strides, and even from a distance he could see that something had changed. The exhaustion was still there, etched into her features, but there was also something else, a lightness, a spark of hope that hadn't been present the night before. "Mr. Redden?" she called out as she approached. "I'm glad I caught you before you left." He touched the brim of his hat but said nothing, waiting. She stopped beside his horse, one hand shading her eyes against the morning sun. "I wanted to tell you, the medicine is working. Dr. Harrison says Jacob's fever broke during the night. He's not well yet, not by a long measure, but he's fighting now. He has a chance." Her voice trembled with emotion. "Because of you, he has a chance." Caleb shifted in his saddle, uncomfortable with her gratitude, with the way she looked at him like he'd done something heroic instead of simply handing over money he could spare. "I'm glad to hear it." I also wanted to extend my invitation again, Anna continued. The coffee I mentioned. I'd very much like to— I'll be gone a few days, Caleb interrupted, unable to bear the hope in her eyes. Sheriff's business. When I get back, maybe. Oh. She stepped back, and he hated the way disappointment flickered across her face. Of course. Well, I hope you'll be safe, Mr. Redden, and when you return, please know that my home is open to you. It's the least I can do for the man who saved my brother's life. He wanted to tell her he hadn't saved anyone's life, that he was just a bounty hunter with too much money and a moment of weakness. He wanted to tell her not to look at him like that, not to smile at him with such warmth, not to make him feel like maybe he was something more than the cold-hearted bastard he'd worked so hard to become. Instead, he just nodded. Take care of yourself, Miss Grayson, and your brother. Anna, she reminded him softly. Please, call me Anna. He didn't answer, just touched his hat brim again and urged Rust into motion. But as he rode north out of Redemption Creek, he could feel her eyes on his back, and the weight of that gaze felt heavier than any gun he'd ever carried. The trail wasn't hard to follow. 3 horses, one carrying extra weight from the strongbox, heading into country Caleb knew well from previous hunts. The Hollister brothers weren't subtle men. They'd left a track that anyone with basic skills could read. But reading a track and catching the men who made it were 2 different things entirely. The first day passed in the methodical rhythm of tracking, watching for broken branches, disturbed stones, the distinctive pattern of horseshoes in soft ground. Caleb pushed hard, knowing that every hour's delay meant the trail grew colder, meant the Hollisters got farther away, or had more time to set up an ambush. He made camp that night in a sheltered ravine, built a small fire just large enough to heat coffee, and sat with his back against a boulder while the darkness gathered around him. This was what he knew, what he was good at, the solitude of the hunt, the simplicity of a clear objective, the absence of complicated feelings or messy human connections. But as he stared into the flames, he kept seeing Anna's face, the way she'd looked at him that morning, with gratitude and something else he was afraid to name, the way her voice had trembled when she'd told him about Jacob's fever breaking, the way she'd said his name, not Redden, not the bounty hunter, but Caleb, like he was an actual person worthy of being known. Stop it, he muttered to himself, pouring more coffee. Focus on the job. The job was what mattered. The job was what he was good at. The job didn't ask him to feel things or care about people or risk the kind of pain that came from letting someone matter. He dozed fitfully that night, jerking awake at every sound, his hand always on his gun. Years of this life had trained him to sleep light, to wake at the snap of a twig or the whisper of movement. It had kept him alive when other men had died. It had also ensured he never truly rested, never fully let his guard down, never allowed himself the luxury of peace. Dawn found him back on the trail, following the Hollisters deeper into the hills. The terrain grew rougher, pine forests giving way to rocky outcroppings and narrow passes where an ambush would be easy to set and hard to escape. Caleb moved carefully, Winchester at the ready, eyes scanning constantly for any sign of danger. He found their first camp around midday, cold ashes, empty cans, the marks where they'd picketed their horses. They'd been careless, confident in their head start, and that confidence would be their downfall. Caleb studied the camp, reading the story it told. 3 men, just as the driver had said. They'd stayed here the previous night, probably feeling safe this far from town, probably already planning how to spend their stolen money. The trail led higher into the mountains, following old game paths and dry creek beds. By late afternoon, Caleb spotted smoke rising from a canyon about 2 miles ahead. He dismounted, tied Rust to a pine tree, and continued on foot, moving with the silence his years as a hunter had taught him. The Hollister brothers had made camp in a box canyon, a natural fortress with high walls and only one entrance. Smart positioning if you were planning to defend against an attack, but it also meant only one way out. Caleb found a position on the canyon rim where he could observe without being seen, settling behind a cluster of rocks as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. 3 men sat around a fire, passing a bottle between them. Even from a distance, Caleb could identify Jack Hollister, tall, rangy, with that distinctive lightning bolt scar running down his left arm. The two brothers were shorter, stockier, both wearing trail-worn clothing and guns slung low on their hips. The strongbox sat near the fire, still locked, probably waiting until they felt safe enough to break it open. $2,000 plus whatever they could steal in future robberies if they weren't stopped. Caleb watched them drink and laugh, celebrating their successful heist, completely unaware they were being observed. He could take them now. A rifle shot from this position would drop Jack before the man knew what hit him, and Caleb could probably get one of the brothers before they scattered. But probably wasn't certainty, and the third man would be armed and desperate, and taking on three men in a defensive position when you were alone was a good way to get killed. Better to wait. Wait for darkness. Wait for them to drink themselves stupid. Wait for the moment when they'd be vulnerable and careless. Patience had kept Caleb alive when impatience had buried other men, and he'd learned long ago to trust his instincts. As twilight deepened into night, he settled in to watch. The brothers kept drinking, their voices carrying on the still air, boasts about the robbery, arguments about how to divide the money, crude jokes about what they'd do when they reached California. Caleb listened with half his attention, the other half focused on planning his approach. The fire burned lower. The bottle emptied. One by one, the brothers rolled into their bedrolls, leaving only Jack Hollister sitting up to keep watch. But Jack was drunk too, swaying slightly where he sat, his eyes heavy with whiskey and exhaustion. Caleb waited another hour, watched Jack's head nod forward once, twice, then finally settle as the man slumped into sleep. Then he moved. He descended from the canyon rim in silence, every step placed with care, his breathing controlled, his body moving with the predatory grace of a hunter closing in on prey. The canyon floor was shadowed, the fire burned down to embers, and the three men snored in their bedrolls, never knowing death approached on soft feet. Caleb reached the fire, his Colt in one hand, and kicked Jack Hollister's boot. "Wake up!" Jack's eyes snapped open, his hand reaching for his gun, but Caleb's Colt was already pressed against his forehead. "Don't," Caleb said quietly. "Wake your brothers, slow and easy. Any sudden moves and you'll be the first to die, but not the last." Jack's face had gone pale in the dim firelight. He knew who Caleb was. Everyone in the territory knew about Caleb Redden, and no one wanted to face him with a gun to their head. "Redden," he breathed. "How the hell did you—" "Your brothers. Wake them, now," Jack called out, and the two brothers stirred, confused and half asleep. When they saw Caleb standing over them, saw the gun in his hand and the cold certainty in his eyes, they froze. "Here's how this works," Caleb said, his voice carrying the flat tone of a man who'd done this too many times to count. "You're going to stand up, slow, hands where I can see them. You're going to let me tie your hands behind your backs. You're going to ride back to Redemption Creek nice and peaceful. Do this, and you'll live to stand trial. Fight me, and I'll kill all three of you right here and transport your bodies instead. Your choice, but choose quick." "We can make a deal," Jack said desperately. "Split the money. There's $2,000 in that box. Take half. Let us go. Nobody has to know." "Not interested." $1,000, Redden. Think about it." "I am thinking about it. I'm thinking about the driver you shot, the families who need that payroll, and the fact that you three will rob and kill again if I let you go. So here's my final offer. Surrender or die. 5 seconds to decide." He started counting, made it to 3 before all three men raised their hands in surrender. 20 minutes later, they were bound and mounted, the strongbox secured to Jack's saddle, and Caleb was leading them out of the canyon. The brothers muttered curses and threats, but Caleb ignored them. He'd heard it all before, the promises of revenge, the claims that he was a dead man, the boasts about what would happen when they escaped. They never escaped. Not from Caleb Redden. The ride back to Redemption Creek took 2.5 days, slower with prisoners in tow. Caleb kept them moving during daylight hours, made camp in defensible positions at night, and slept with one eye open and his gun in his hand. The brothers tried to bargain, tried to bribe, tried to convince him to let them go. Caleb didn't respond, didn't engage, didn't give them anything to work with. By the time the town appeared in the distance, he was exhausted, filthy, and ready to collect his money and move on. The job was done. Another set of criminals behind bars, another payday secured, another page in the legend of Caleb Redden, the bounty hunter with ice in his veins and stone for a heart. Sheriff Bridger met them at the edge of town, a wide smile splitting his weathered face. "I'll be damned. You actually brought all three back alive." "Said I would." "Most men would have shot at least one, just to make the others more cooperative." "Most men aren't me." Bridger chuckled and took custody of the prisoners, leading them toward the jail while half the town gathered to watch. Caleb dismounted, every muscle in his body aching, and followed at a distance. In the sheriff's office, he waited while Bridger locked the Hollisters in cells, then watched as the strongbox was opened and the money counted. $2,147, all accounted for. 20% comes to $429, Bridger said, counting it out carefully, plus another $50 for the exceptional work and the fact that you brought them all in alive. Town council will be pleased. Trial's cheaper than burials. Caleb pocketed the money without comment. $479 for 3 days' work, more than he'd made on many bounties that had taken twice as long. "You sticking around?" Bridger asked. "Or are you finally going to light out like you've been threatening?" Good question. Caleb had no reason to stay. The job was done, his pockets were full, and the open trail called to him the way it always did. Stay in one place too long, and you started forming connections, started caring about things, started feeling like maybe you belonged somewhere, and that was dangerous because eventually you'd have to leave, and leaving would hurt. Better to leave before it could hurt. "I'll stay tonight," he heard himself say. "Head out in the morning." "Well, while you're here, you might want to stop by the schoolhouse." Bridger's eyes held a knowing glint. "Miss Grayson's been asking about you, near about every day since you left. That brother of hers is doing much better, by the way. Saw him up and walking around yesterday, still coughing some, but clearly on the mend." Something warm unfurled in Caleb's chest. Relief, he recognized after a moment. Relief that the boy was healing, that Anna's desperate hope had been rewarded, that the $15 he'd given her had made a difference. "Glad to hear it," he said gruffly. "You know," Bridger leaned back in his chair, studying Caleb with the careful attention of a man who'd spent years reading people. "When you first rode into this territory 3 years ago, you were already hard. But there was still something in you, something almost human. These last few years, I've watched that something disappear, watched you turn into exactly what you pretend to be, a man without feelings, without connections, without anything but the next bounty and the next bottle of whiskey." "Get to your point, Sheriff." "My point is this. Miss Grayson looks at you different than other folks do. She doesn't see the cold-hearted bounty hunter. She sees something else, something you've been trying real hard to bury. Maybe it's time you stopped trying so hard." Caleb stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "My personal life is none of your concern." "You're right, it's not. But I like that school teacher, and I like her brother, and I'd hate to see them hurt because you're too stubborn to admit you might actually give a damn about someone." Bridger held up his hands. "But you do what you think is right. You always do." Caleb left the office without another word, stepping out into the afternoon sun. The town was busier than it had been when he'd left. People going about their daily business, kids running between buildings, the sound of hammers from where someone was building an addition onto the general store. Normal life. The kind that happened when you stayed in one place long enough to put down roots. The kind of life Caleb had given up on 10 years ago. He should go to the saloon, get drunk, sleep it off, and leave at dawn. That was the plan. That was always the plan. But his feet carried him toward the schoolhouse instead, drawn by something he couldn't name and didn't want to examine too closely. The school day had just ended, children streaming out with the particular energy of young people released from confinement. They ran past Caleb without a second glance, too caught up in their own games and dramas to notice the tall stranger standing in the street. But one boy didn't run. A thin kid with dark hair and pale skin, moving slowly but steadily toward a small cabin in the distance. Jacob Grayson. Had to be, based on the age and the careful way he moved, like someone still recovering from serious illness. The boy glanced at Caleb as he passed, his blue eyes, so like his sister's, curious but not afraid. "You're the bounty hunter," Jacob said, not a question but a statement. "I am." "My sister says you saved my life." Caleb shifted uncomfortably. "Your sister's medicine saved your life. I just helped pay for it." "That's not what she says." Jacob studied him with the unsettling directness of children who haven't learned to hide their thoughts. She says you're a good man pretending to be bad. Says you gave her money when you didn't have to, helped me when you didn't know me, and that makes you better than most folks who talk about being good, but don't do anything to prove it. The words hit harder than Caleb expected. He cleared his throat. Your sister talks too much. She talks just enough, Jacob replied with a small smile. You should come for coffee. She's been hoping you would. I don't drink coffee with people. Why not? Because connection leads to caring. Caring leads to pain, and pain is something I can't afford anymore, Caleb thought. But he didn't say that to a 12-year-old boy who'd just survived pneumonia. Just don't, he said instead. Jacob shrugged. Well, if you change your mind, we're the cabin with the green door. Anna makes really good coffee, and she baked bread yesterday. He started to walk away, then paused and looked back. Thank you, Mr. Redden, for whatever you say you didn't do. I'm glad I get to keep living because of it. The boy continued toward home, leaving Caleb standing in the dusty street, something tightening in his chest. When was the last time someone had thanked him for anything? When was the last time he'd done something worth thanking? When was the last time he'd allowed himself to believe he might actually be capable of good? The schoolhouse door opened and Anna Grayson stepped out, a stack of books in her arms. She saw him immediately, her face lighting up with a smile that made his heart do something complicated and unwelcome. Mr. Redden, she called, walking toward him. You're back. I'd heard the sheriff brought in the stage robbers, and I hoped— She stopped a few feet away, her smile faltering as she took in his appearance. You look exhausted. Long ride. I imagine so. She shifted the books in her arms. Did you happen to see Jacob? He should have left a few minutes ago. Saw him. He was headed home. Good. He's doing so much better, stronger every day. Dr. Harrison says he'll make a full recovery. Her eyes shone with tears she didn't try to hide. I can't thank you enough for what you did. You gave me back my brother. Medicine did that. The medicine I couldn't afford without your help. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell lavender and chalk dust. I meant what I said about the coffee, Mr. Redden. I'd very much like you to visit, to let me thank you properly. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to walk away, to maintain the careful distance he'd spent years perfecting. But looking into her eyes, those blue eyes that held hope and warmth, and something that looked dangerously like affection, he found himself nodding. Tonight, he heard himself say. If the offer's still good. Her smile could have lit the whole town. Tonight would be perfect. Come by after supper, say 7 o'clock? 7 o'clock? He agreed, already regretting it. She touched his arm briefly, a gesture so natural and warm that it sent unexpected heat through him. I'll see you then. He watched her walk away, books clutched to her chest, her step lighter than it had been days before. Then he turned and headed for the saloon, suddenly desperate for that drink he'd postponed. The bartender, Patterson, looked up as Caleb entered. Heard you brought in the Hollisters. Nice work. Thanks. You look like you could use a drink. Several. Patterson poured whiskey, and Caleb drank it standing at the bar, trying to figure out what he was doing. Why had he agreed to coffee with Anna Grayson? Why had he said yes when every part of him knew it was a mistake? Why was he standing in this saloon at 4 in the afternoon, drinking whiskey and counting the hours until 7 o'clock like some nervous schoolboy? She's something special, that Miss Grayson, Patterson said conversationally, refilling Caleb's glass. Smart, kind, doesn't put on airs despite coming from Boston money. Well, former Boston money, I suppose. Town's lucky to have her. Why are you telling me this? Because you agreed to have coffee with her, and I figure you're the kind of man who needs reminding that special people deserve to be treated special. Caleb drained his glass. I'm not going to hurt her. Didn't say you would. But she's been alone here. No family except that boy. No friends really, because the other women in town think she's too educated or too pretty or too something. She could use someone who sees her for who she is. Patterson leaned forward. And you, Redden, you could use someone who sees past what you pretend to be to what you actually are. And what's that? A decent man running from his own decency. Caleb left the saloon without finishing his third drink. He walked the town for the next 2 hours, buying time, trying to convince himself to mount his horse and ride out before 7 o'clock arrived. He could leave now, Anna would understand eventually. and he'd be back to his solitary life where things made sense. But he didn't leave. At 10 minutes to 7, he found himself standing outside her cabin, his hand raised to knock, his heart beating faster than it had when he'd faced down the Hollister brothers. Just coffee, he told himself. Just one evening to say thank you, to be polite, to repay a debt, and move on. The door opened before he could knock. Anna stood there in a simple blue dress, her hair down around her shoulders, her smile welcoming and genuine. "Mr. Redden, right on time. Please, come in." He stepped inside and warmth enveloped him, not just the physical warmth of the cabin, but something else. Something he hadn't felt in so long he'd almost forgotten what it was called. It was called home. The cabin was small but immaculately kept. A single room with a bed in one corner, a table with 3 chairs, a stove, and a few personal touches that made it feel lived in. Books lined a makeshift shelf, a quilt hung on one wall, and flowers, actual wildflowers in a glass jar, sat on the table. Jacob sat in one of the chairs, looking stronger than he had that afternoon. He grinned when he saw Caleb. "Told you he'd come, Anna." "You did indeed." Anna gestured to a chair. "Please sit. The coffee's just about ready." Caleb sat, feeling awkward and out of place among the domestic comfort. His gun felt too heavy at his hip, his trail-worn clothes too dirty, his hands too rough for the delicate china cups Anna was setting out. "I hope you like it strong," Anna said, pouring coffee. "Jacob says I make it strong enough to wake the dead." "Strong is good." She handed him a cup, their fingers brushing again, and he was struck by how small her hands were compared to his, how soft they looked despite the work he knew she did. These were hands that held chalk and books, that cared for a sick brother, that fought to build a life in a hard land. Not like his hands, which were scarred and calloused and had pulled triggers too many times to count. "Tell me about your journey," Anna said, settling into her chair with her own cup. "The sheriff said you tracked the robbers into the hill country. That must have been dangerous." "It was necessary." "That's not an answer." Jacob laughed. "She does that, turns your non-answers back on you until you actually answer. It's annoying." "It's called teaching," Anna said primly, though her eyes sparkled with amusement. "And it works on stubborn men just as well as it works on stubborn students." Despite himself, Caleb felt the corner of his mouth twitch. The tracking was straightforward. The Hollisters aren't subtle. I found them, convinced them to surrender, brought them back. That's the whole story. "Somehow I doubt that's the whole story," Anna said, "but I won't press. Jacob, why don't you tell Mr. Redden about your plans for next week?" The boy's face lit up. "Dr. Harrison says I can go back to school on Monday. I missed 3 weeks, but Anna's been teaching me at home, so I'm not too far behind." His enthusiasm dimmed slightly. "Some of the other kids were saying I might not make it, that pneumonia almost always kills you, but I did make it, because of the medicine you helped buy." "You made it because you're strong," Caleb said, surprising himself with the gentleness in his voice. "And because your sister fought for you." "And because you gave us the money when we needed it most?" Anna added quietly. She met his eyes across the table. "We both know Jacob wouldn't be here without that. And I will never forget it, Mr. Redden. Never." The gratitude in her voice made him deeply uncomfortable. He shifted in his chair, took a long drink of coffee, which was, indeed, strong enough to wake the dead, and searched for a way to change the subject. "You said you're from Boston," he ventured. "That's a long way from Montana Territory." Anna's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "It is. We came here 4 months ago, after our father passed. He left us with more debts than assets, and Boston was no longer home. The teaching position here offered a fresh start." "Just the 2 of you?" "Just the 2 of us. Our mother died when Jacob was born, and we have no other family." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "It's been an adjustment, coming from a city to a frontier town. But the people here have been mostly kind, and the children are eager to learn, and—" She smiled. "And we're still together, which is what matters most." "Anna gave up everything to take care of me," Jacob said with the bluntness of youth. "Had a fiancé back in Boston, a nice house, all her friends. But when father died and left all those debts, the fiancé disappeared real quick, and the friends turned out not to be friends at all. So we came here." "Jacob," Anna said warningly. What? It's true. It's also private. Mr. Redden helped save my life. I figure that makes him entitled to know things. Caleb found himself wanting to know things, wanting to know about the fiancé who'd abandoned her, the friends who'd proven false, the life she'd left behind, wanting to know everything about Anna Grayson, which was dangerous precisely because he wanted it. Your turn, Anna said, fixing him with a look that suggested she wasn't going to let him avoid answering. Tell us something about yourself, Mr. Redden. Where are you from? What made you become a bounty hunter? The questions he always avoided, the past he never discussed. He should refuse, should deflect, should maintain the walls that had served him so well for so long. But sitting in this warm cabin, with Anna watching him with those blue eyes and Jacob leaning forward with undisguised curiosity, Caleb found the walls crumbling just a little. Virginia, he said finally. I'm from Virginia, and I became a bounty hunter because… He paused, the words stuck in his throat. Because I needed to be something after the war, and hunting seemed like the only thing I was good at anymore. The truth, or at least a version of it, the real truth, about Emily, about his family, about everything he'd lost, stayed locked away where it belonged. But Anna seemed to understand that some truths were too painful to speak aloud. She nodded, her expression softening with compassion. The war took many things from many people. It did. Are you planning to stay in Redemption Creek? Jacob asked. Or are you leaving again? Jacob, Anna said again, though she looked at Caleb with obvious interest in his answer. Leaving tomorrow, Caleb said, and tried to ignore the way Anna's face fell. I don't stay in one place long. Never have. Probably never will. Why not? Jacob pressed. Because staying means putting down roots, and roots tie you to places. And places… He stopped, aware he was revealing more than he intended. It's just not what I do. That sounds lonely, Anna said softly. It was lonely. Desperately, achingly, endlessly lonely. But loneliness was safe. Loneliness was predictable. Loneliness didn't reach into your chest and rip your heart out when the people you loved died screaming. It's what I'm used to, he said instead. They sat in silence for a moment, drinking coffee, the only sound the crackling of the fire in the stove. Then Anna rose, moved to a shelf, and returned with something wrapped in cloth. I baked bread yesterday, she said, unwrapping it to reveal a golden loaf. Jacob mentioned it to you, I believe. Would you like some? It's nothing fancy, but… I'd like some, Caleb said, because it had been years since anyone had baked bread for him. Years since anyone had offered him something made with care rather than duty. She cut thick slices, spread them with butter that must have cost more than she could afford, and passed them around. Caleb bit into his piece and tasted something beyond flour and yeast. He tasted effort, attention, the particular flavor of someone who put love into what they made. This is good, he said, and meant it. Anna's smile was radiant. Thank you. I'm glad you like it. They talked for another hour, about nothing important, about everything that mattered. Jacob told stories about school, about the other children, about his hopes of becoming a doctor someday. Anna described her challenges teaching students of wildly different ages and abilities, her frustrations with the town council's reluctance to fund proper supplies, her small triumphs when a child finally grasped a concept they'd struggled with. And Caleb, despite his best intentions, found himself talking too. About Montana Territory, about the places he'd traveled, about the strange and beautiful things he'd seen. He left out the blood and violence, left out the darkness that soaked most of his memories, but what remained was enough to make Jacob's eyes shine with adventure and Anna's expression warm with interest. For those hours, sitting in that cabin with coffee and bread and conversation, Caleb Redding forgot he was supposed to be a man with a stone heart. He laughed at Jacob's jokes, smiled at Anna's stories, and felt something dangerous stir in his chest, the first faint cracks in walls he'd thought unbreakable. But all good things end, and eventually Jacob's yawns became too obvious to ignore. Anna shooed him to bed with practiced efficiency, tucking him in with a tenderness that made Caleb's throat tight. Thank you for coming tonight, Anna said when she returned to the table. I know it wasn't easy for you. Why do you say that? Because everything about you suggests a man who spent years avoiding exactly this kind of evening. She sat down across from him, her hands folded on the table. But I'm glad you came anyway. It meant a lot to Jacob. It meant a lot to me. He should leave now, before this went any further. Should stand up, thank her for the coffee, and walk out that door back to his solitary life. Instead, he heard himself ask, "Why did you really leave Boston?" Anna's hands tightened around each other. "I told you, the debts, the teaching position, that's not all of it." She met his eyes, and in them he saw pain that matched his own. "No," she admitted quietly. "That's not all of it." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Finally, Anna took a deep breath. "My father gambled," she said. "Lost everything, the house, the money, even the furniture. When he died, creditors came calling for debts I didn't even know existed. My fiancé, Charles, he was from a good family, respected, wealthy. When he learned about the debts, when he realized I came with financial burden rather than fortune," her voice hardened. "He ended our engagement the very day of my father's funeral, said he couldn't be associated with scandal. He was a fool." "He was practical," Anna corrected, though her eyes shone with unshed tears. "And he made me realize that everything I'd built in Boston was built on lies, false friends, false love, false security. So when the teaching position here became available, I took it. Better to start over in a place where nobody knows you than to stay somewhere everyone knows you failed. You didn't fail. Who? Your father failed? Your fiancé failed? You just kept going." "Did I?" She wiped at her eyes impatiently. "Some days it doesn't feel like I'm keeping going. It feels like I'm barely surviving, holding on by my fingernails, one disaster away from completely falling apart." She laughed bitterly. "And then Jacob got sick, and I couldn't even afford the medicine to save him. What kind of sister does that make me? The kind who begged strangers for help rather than watching him die. The kind who fought when most people would have given up." Caleb leaned forward, surprised by the intensity in his own voice. "You're stronger than you think, Anna Grayson." She looked at him, really looked at him, and something shifted in the air between them. Something electric, something dangerous, something that made his pulse quicken and his breath catch. "What are you running from, Caleb Redden?" she asked softly. "What hurt you so badly that you'd rather be alone than risk connection?" The question hit like a physical blow. No one had asked him that in 10 years. No one had seen past the cold exterior to the wounded man beneath. No one had dared. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I should go." "Don't." Anna stood too, moving around the table to stand in front of him. "Don't run. Not yet." "I'm not running." "Yes, you are. You've been running since the moment you agreed to come here tonight, maybe longer." She reached out, hesitated, then placed her hand on his arm. "What are you so afraid of?" "Everything. Loss, pain, caring about someone enough that their death would destroy him. Opening his heart only to have it shattered again. Believing that maybe, just maybe, he deserved something good only to watch it slip through his fingers." "I can't," he said roughly. "Can't what you're asking. Can't be what you want." "I'm not asking you to be anything except honest. With me. With yourself." Her hand remained on his arm, warm and steady. "I know pain when I see it, Caleb. I know what it looks like when someone's carrying more weight than they should. And I know you're a good man, no matter how hard you try to convince everyone otherwise. You don't know me. Maybe not, but I'd like to." Her blue eyes held his, unflinching. "I'd like to know the man who saved my brother, who brought in criminals without killing them, who drinks his coffee black and laughs at 12-year-old boys' jokes even when he doesn't mean to. I'd like to know Caleb, not the bounty hunter, not the legend, just the man." The words broke something inside him, something he'd thought long dead. He stood there, frozen, Anna's hand on his arm, her eyes on his face, and for the first time in 10 years, Caleb Redden felt the stone around his heart begin to crack. "I had someone once," he heard himself say, the words dragged from somewhere deep and dark. "Someone I loved more than my own life. She died. They all died. And I—" His voice broke. "I couldn't save them. Couldn't stop it. Could only watch and know it was my fault." Anna's hand slid down his arm to his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. "That's a heavy burden to carry alone. It's the burden I deserve. No one deserves that kind of pain." She squeezed his hand. But maybe you've carried it long enough. Maybe it's time to set it down. He wanted to. God, how he wanted to. Wanted to lay down the guilt and grief and self-hatred, wanted to believe he could be more than the cold-hearted hunter everyone believed him to be, wanted to think that maybe, impossibly, this woman with her blue eyes and gentle strength could help him find his way back to being human. But wanting wasn't enough. Wanting hadn't saved Emily, hadn't protected his family, hadn't stopped the world from burning. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he repeated, his voice rough with emotion. "That hasn't changed." "I know," Anna said softly. "But maybe you'll come back someday. Maybe the road will lead you through Redemption Creek again." "Maybe," he agreed, though they both knew it was unlikely. She rose on her toes and kissed his cheek, the touch feather-light and devastating. "Thank you for tonight, Caleb, for the coffee, for the conversation, for letting me see the real you, even if only for a moment." He couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only stand there feeling the warmth of her lips on his skin and the terrible, wonderful ache in his chest. Then he was at the door, his hand on the handle, looking back at her one last time. She stood in the lamplight, beautiful and brave, and everything he couldn't allow himself to have. "Anna," he said, then stopped, unsure what else to say. "Go safely," she whispered. "Come back whole." He left before he could do something stupid like promise to return, like tell her she'd cracked his heart open wider than he'd thought possible, like admit that leaving her was going to be harder than he'd imagined. Outside, the night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Caleb stood on her porch for a long moment, breathing in the mountain air, trying to collect the pieces of himself that seemed to have scattered inside that warm cabin. Then he walked back toward the saloon, his steps heavy, his heart heavier. Tomorrow, he'd ride out. Tomorrow, he'd return to his solitary life. Tomorrow, he'd forget about Anna Grayson and her brother and the way she made him feel almost human again. Tomorrow. But tonight, he lay in his rented bed and stared at the ceiling, his cheek still warm where she'd kissed him, his hand still tingling where she'd held it, and his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble in earnest. Tomorrow came with a pale dawn that found Caleb already awake, having barely slept at all. He packed his saddlebags with mechanical efficiency, checked his weapons, and settled his bill with the saloon keeper before most of the town had stirred from their beds. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to leave before Anna woke, before he had to see those blue eyes one more time and feel his resolve weaken further. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As he led Russ toward the edge of town, the schoolhouse door opened and Anna emerged, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the morning chill. She saw him immediately, and for a moment they simply stood there, 50 feet apart, the rising sun painting the sky behind her in shades of pink and gold. She walked toward him slowly, her expression unreadable in the early light. When she reached him, she didn't speak at first, just looked up at him with those eyes that seemed to see straight through every defense he'd ever built. "I thought you might leave early," she said finally. "Hoped you wouldn't, but thought you might. It's better this way." Better for whom? He didn't have an answer for that. Or rather, he had several answers, none of which felt true when spoken aloud. "I brought you something," Anna said, pulling a small cloth-wrapped bundle from her pocket. "It's not much, just some bread and cheese for the road. I know you're probably well supplied, but I thought—" She stopped, looking down at the bundle in her hands. "I wanted you to have something to remember us by." The yes hit him harder than it should have. Not just her, but Jacob, too. Both of them, woven into his thoughts, taking up space in his carefully guarded heart. He took the bundle, their fingers brushing in the exchange, and felt that now familiar warmth spread through him. "Thank you." "Will you really never come back?" The question was quiet, almost hesitant, as if she was afraid of the answer. "I don't know," he admitted, because lying to her felt impossible. "I don't make plans beyond the next job, the next town. Never have." "That sounds exhausting." "It's safe." "Safe," she repeated, and there was something in her voice, disappointment, maybe, or understanding, or both. "Yes, I suppose it is. No risk, no pain, no connection, no loss." She looked up at him. "But also no joy, Caleb, no love, no reason to wake up in the morning beyond simple survival." Survival's enough. Is it? She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell lavender in her hair. Because from where I stand, you look like a man who's been surviving for so long that he's forgotten how to actually live. The words struck deep, carving into places he'd thought sealed off. She was right, of course. He'd stopped living the day Emily died, stopped believing in anything beyond making it to the next sunrise. 10 years of survival, of emptiness, of existing without purpose or hope or anything resembling joy. I don't know how to do anything else, he said, and the admission cost him more than he expected. Then maybe it's time to learn. Anna reached up, her hand gentle against his scarred cheek. Or maybe it's time to remember, because I don't believe you've forgotten completely. I think you're just afraid of what remembering might cost you. He should pull away, should mount his horse, and ride out before this conversation went any further. But her hand on his face felt like absolution, like the promise of something he'd given up on, and he couldn't make himself move. What do you want from me, Anna? Nothing you're not ready to give, just... She paused, her eyes searching his. Just don't close yourself off completely. Don't let the stone win. Somewhere inside you is the man who helped a stranger's dying brother, who sat in my cabin and laughed with a 12-year-old boy, who looked at me like maybe I wasn't alone in this world after all. That man deserves better than endless running. Before he could respond, before he could find words adequate to the moment, she rose on her toes and kissed him. Not on the cheek this time, but on the lips, soft, brief, devastating in its tenderness. Then she stepped back, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright. Come back when you're ready to stop running, Caleb Redden. We'll be here. She turned and walked away before he could answer, her shawl trailing behind her in the morning breeze, leaving him standing in the street with a cloth-wrapped bundle in one hand and his heart threatening to crack completely open. He watched until she disappeared into the schoolhouse, then forced himself to mount Rust and turn north, away from Redemption Creek, away from Anna Grayson, away from the dangerous possibility of something he'd thought lost forever. The first day's ride was torture. Every mile took him farther from that cabin with the green door, from those blue eyes that saw too much, from the feeling of being human again. He tried to focus on the road ahead, on the next town, the next bounty, the next whiskey bottle that would help him forget. But he couldn't forget the taste of her kiss, or the weight of her words, or the terrible, wonderful knowledge that she'd cracked something inside him that might never fully close again. He made camp that night in a pine grove, built a small fire, and unwrapped the bundle Anna had given him. The bread was still soft, the cheese sharp and good. He ate slowly, savoring each bite not because of the food itself, but because her hands had prepared it, because it was a gift given freely without expectation of return. The loneliness hit him like a physical blow. How many years had he eaten alone, slept alone, ridden alone? How many sunrises had he watched with no one to share them with? How many nights had he lain awake, surrounded by silence so complete it felt like dying? Too many. God, too many. But the alternative, letting someone in, caring again, risking the kind of loss that had nearly destroyed him, that felt impossible. Emily's death had taught him that loving someone gave them the power to annihilate you, that opening your heart meant handing someone else the knife to carve it out. He'd barely survived that lesson the first time. He wouldn't survive it again. Better to be alone. Better to be safe. He repeated it like a mantra as he spread his bedroll, as he checked his weapons, as he lay down under stars that suddenly seemed colder and more distant than they had just days before. 3 days later found him in a mining town called Silver Ridge, collecting information on a claim jumper wanted for murder. The work was straightforward, the pay decent, and it should have been enough to distract him from thoughts of blue eyes and gentle hands. It wasn't. Anna haunted him. In the face of a school teacher he passed on the street, in the sound of children's laughter from a nearby schoolhouse, in every woman who showed kindness to someone in need. She'd gotten under his skin, into his head, and no amount of whiskey or work seemed capable of dislodging her. He caught the claim jumper after 2 days of tracking, delivered him to the local sheriff, and collected his bounty with the same efficiency he always had. But something felt different now, hollow. The satisfaction he usually took in a job well done had evaporated, replaced by a gnawing sense that he was wasting his life chasing men who didn't matter while running from the one thing that did. A week became 2. He drifted north, taking jobs as they came, sleeping in saloons and lined shacks, maintaining the careful distance from humanity that had served him for so long. But the distance didn't feel protective anymore. It felt suffocating. He was in a town called Millerville 3 weeks after leaving Redemption Creek when the telegram arrived. Caleb rarely checked for messages. He had no one to send them, no one who cared where he was or what he was doing. But some instinct made him stop at the telegraph office that afternoon, and the operator looked up with obvious relief. "Mr. Redden? Got a wire for you. Been here 4 days. Sender said it was urgent." Caleb's stomach tightened as he took the paper. Only one person would send him an urgent telegram. And if Sheriff Bridger was reaching out, something was very wrong. The message was brief and devastating. Jacob Grayson taken sudden turn. Pneumonia returned worse. Anna needs you. Come quick. Bridger. The paper crumpled in his fist. No, not Jacob. Not after he'd survived, after he'd been healing, after Anna had fought so hard to save him. The universe couldn't be that cruel, couldn't dangle hope in front of them, only to rip it away. But Caleb knew better than most that the universe could be exactly that cruel. He was on Rust and riding south within 10 minutes, pushing the gelding harder than he should have, covering ground with desperate speed. 3 days of hard travel, stopping only when absolutely necessary, sleeping in the saddle when he could manage it, driven by a fear so profound it threatened to choke him. He couldn't let Jacob die. Couldn't let Anna lose the only family she had left. Couldn't bear the thought of those blue eyes filled with the kind of grief he knew too intimately. But more than that, and this was the thought that terrified him most, he couldn't bear the thought of not being there for her, of Anna facing this darkness alone, of failing someone who trusted him with her hope. When had he started caring this much? When had Anna and Jacob stopped being strangers and become something more, something that mattered enough to make him ride 3 days without real rest? When had the walls around his heart crumbled so completely that their pain became his pain, their loss his loss? The questions haunted him as he rode, but he already knew the answers. It had started the moment he'd seen Anna begging for medicine in the saloon, had deepened when she'd held his hand in that warm cabin, had sealed itself when she'd kissed him in the morning light and told him to stop running. He was in love with Anna Grayson. Completely, terrifyingly, irrevocably in love with her. And the realization should have sent him fleeing in the opposite direction, should have made him turn Rust around and ride until he forgot her name. Instead, it made him push harder, ride faster, pray to a God he'd stopped believing in years ago that he wouldn't be too late. Redemption Creek appeared on the horizon just after dawn on the 3rd day. Caleb rode straight through town to the cabin with the green door, not caring who saw him, not caring about anything except getting to Anna. He dismounted before Rust had fully stopped, hit the door with his fist, and called her name. The door opened immediately, and Dr. Harrison stood there, his weathered face grave. "You made good time, Redden," the doctor said, stepping back to let Caleb inside. The cabin felt like a tomb. The curtains were drawn, the air heavy with the smell of sickness and medicine and something else, the particular scent of fear and desperation. Anna sat beside Jacob's bed, her hand clutching her brother's, her face so pale and drawn that Caleb barely recognized her. She looked up when he entered, and the relief in her eyes nearly broke him. "You came," she whispered, her voice raw from crying. "Of course I came." He moved to her side, knelt beside her chair, and took her free hand in both of his. She was cold, trembling, barely holding herself together. "How bad is it?" "Bad," Dr. Harrison answered when Anna couldn't. "The pneumonia came back with a vengeance 5 days ago. His lungs are filling with fluid faster than I can drain them. The fever's been over 104 for 2 days now. I've tried everything, but..." He shook his head. "I'm sorry, Miss Grayson. I don't think there's anything more I can do." "No." The word tore from Anna's throat. "No, there has to be something. Another medicine, another treatment, something." "I've given him everything available in Montana Territory," Harrison said gently. "There are treatments in Denver, new medicines from Europe, but they're weeks away even if we could afford them, and Jacob doesn't have weeks. He has days at most, maybe hours." Anna made a sound like a wounded animal, her grip on Caleb's hand tightening until her nails drew blood. He looked at Jacob. The boy was unconscious, his breathing shallow and labored, his skin waxen, his lips tinged blue. This was how death looked. Caleb had seen it enough times to recognize the signs. "Leave us," Caleb said to the doctor, his voice rough. "Please." Harrison nodded and gathered his things. "I'll check back this evening. If anything changes, send for me immediately." He paused at the door, looking back at Anna with obvious compassion. "I'm truly sorry, Miss Grayson. He's a good boy. Deserves better than this." When the door closed, Anna finally broke. Great, racking sobs shook her whole body as she collapsed against Caleb's shoulder, years of strength and stoicism crumbling under the weight of impending loss. "I can't lose him," she sobbed into Caleb's chest. "I can't. He's all I have, all that's left of my family. If he dies, I'm alone, completely alone." Caleb held her, one hand stroking her hair, the other tight around her shaking shoulders. He'd held dying men on battlefields, had watched friends breathe their last. But this was different. This was Anna's pain, Jacob's life, and it mattered in a way nothing had mattered in 10 years. "You're not alone," he said fiercely. "Do you hear me, Anna? You're not alone. I'm here. I'm not leaving." "You always leave," she said, the words muffled against his shirt. "Not this time." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, to let her see the truth in his face. "Not ever again, if you'll have me. I'm done running, Anna. Done pretending I don't care. Done being the man with the stone heart. You cracked it open, you and Jacob both, and I—" His voice broke. "I love you. I think I've loved you since the moment you refused to let pride stop you from saving your brother, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let you face this alone." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were different. Not just grief, but something else. Hope, maybe. Or gratitude. Or the beginnings of love returned. "He's dying, Caleb," she whispered. "Dr. Harrison said—" "I know what he said. But Jacob's strong. He fought this once before, and he can fight it again. He's 12 years old. He's already fought more than any child should have to fight. Then we'll fight for him." Caleb stood, his jaw set with determination. "Harrison said there are treatments in Denver. New medicines. How far is Denver?" 3 days hard ride, maybe 4. But even if we could get there, even if we could find the medicines, Jacob doesn't have that kind of time, and we certainly don't have that kind of money. I have money. $400 from bringing in the Hollisters, plus another $300 from jobs since then. That enough? Anna stared at him. "Caleb, that's your money. I can't—" "It's not mine. It's ours. Yours, Jacob's, mine. And money's no good to me if I let someone I love die because I was too stubborn to spend it." He moved to the bed, looked down at Jacob's unconscious form. "He's a good kid, Anna. Smart, brave, kind. World needs more people like him, fewer people like me." "Don't say that." "It's true. But maybe—" He turned to look at her, letting her see past every wall, every defense, every carefully maintained distance. "Maybe I can be better. Maybe loving you, helping him, staying here instead of running, maybe that makes me something more than just a hunter with blood on his hands." Anna rose from her chair and came to him, her arms wrapping around his waist, her head against his chest. He could feel her heartbeat, rapid and fragile, could feel the tears soaking through his shirt. "You're already more than that," she said softly. "You've always been more than that." They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other while Jacob's labored breathing filled the cabin. Then Caleb gently extracted himself from her embrace. "I'm going to Denver," he announced. "I'll ride hard, get whatever medicines Harrison says might help, and be back in 4 days, 5 at most." "Caleb, that's impossible. Even if you kill your horse getting there, even if everything goes perfectly, then it goes perfectly. What's the alternative, Anna? Stand here and watch him die?" He took her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away tears. "I won't do that. I can't. I have to try, even if it's impossible, even if I'm too late, because the alternative is something I'm not willing to accept." She searched his face, and whatever she saw there made her nod. "Then go. Go fast, go safe, and come back to us." "Both of us," he said firmly. "I'm coming back to both of you." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, pouring everything he couldn't say into that kiss. His fear, his love, his determination to save the boy who'd become like a brother to him. When he pulled away, Anna's eyes were bright with tears and something fiercer. "I love you too," she said, "in case I don't get to tell you later. I love you, Caleb Redden, Stoneheart and all." He wanted to stay, wanted to hold her until the fear passed, wanted to be there when Jacob woke up, if he woke up. But every second mattered now, every minute counted, and Denver was 3 days away at a killing pace. He grabbed a scrap of paper from Anna's teaching supplies and scribbled a quick note to Dr. Harrison, asking for the specific names of medicines that might help, any special instructions, anything that might make the difference between life and death. Then he was out the door, shouting for someone to find the doctor while he prepared Rust for the hardest ride the gelding had ever made. Sheriff Bridger appeared, drawn by the commotion. "You're going to Denver?" "I am. That's a hell of a ride, Redden. You'll kill your horse, maybe kill yourself." "Then I'll die trying." Caleb cinched the saddle tight, checked his saddlebags. "Send my regards to the devil when you see him. You're going to need a fresh horse." Bridger disappeared and returned minutes later with a strong-looking roan mare. "Take Dancer. She's faster than your gelding, got more stamina. You can swap between them, keep moving when one tires." Caleb looked at the sheriff, seeing past the badge to the man beneath, a man who cared about this town, about Anna and Jacob, about doing what was right even when it was hard. "Thank you," Caleb said, and meant it for more than just the horse. "Bring those medicines back, son. Bring that boy home." Dr. Harrison arrived with a list of medicines: carbolic acid, digitalis, atropine, morphine for pain. Complex names that meant nothing to Caleb, but everything to Jacob's survival. Harrison also wrote a letter of introduction to a doctor he knew in Denver, someone who'd help navigate the city's medical suppliers. "This is a long shot, Redden," Harrison warned. "Even if you make it there and back in time, these medicines might not work. The boy's very sick." "He was very sick before, and he survived." "That was different. This relapse, the severity of it. I don't care about statistics, Doc. I care about giving him a chance." Caleb folded the letter carefully, tucked it in his shirt pocket next to his heart. "Keep him alive until I get back. That's all I'm asking. I'll do everything I can." Caleb mounted Rust, the roan mare tied to his saddle, and looked back at Anna's cabin one last time. She stood in the doorway, her hand raised in farewell or blessing or prayer. He touched his hat brim to her, then turned both horses toward Denver and kicked them into motion. The ride that followed would later be spoken of in Redemption Creek like legend. 3 days and nights of relentless travel, stopping only to switch horses, grab food, catch an hour's sleep when absolutely necessary. Caleb pushed himself and the animals to their absolute limits, covering ground that should have taken 5 days in just over 3. He reached Denver on the evening of the 3rd day, his body screaming with exhaustion, his hands blistered from the reins, his vision blurring with fatigue. But he found the doctor Harrison had mentioned, presented his letter, and secured the medicines within hours. The return trip was even harder. Caleb had been awake for close to 60 hours, sustained by nothing but coffee, determination, and the image of Anna's face when he'd promised to come back. He dozed in the saddle, trusting Rust and Dancer to follow the trail, jerking awake at every sound or stumble. On the 2nd day of the return journey, his body finally rebelled. He fell from the saddle during one of his microsleeps, hit the ground hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. He lay there in the dirt, every muscle screaming, his vision graying at the edges, and thought maybe this was where it ended, face down in Montana dust, the medicines just inches from his hand but impossible to deliver. Then he thought of Jacob fighting for every breath, of Anna keeping vigil with no one to share her fear, of the promise he'd made to come back to both of them. He pushed himself up, remounted despite the pain, and kept riding. Redemption Creek appeared on the horizon just after dawn on the 4th day. Caleb rode straight through town to Anna's cabin, his clothes filthy, his face haggard, the precious medicines clutched in one hand. The cabin was silent when he dismounted, too silent. Fear gripped his chest as he approached the door, afraid of what silence might mean, afraid he'd ridden 4 days for nothing, afraid Anna was inside keeping vigil over her brother's body. He knocked, his hand trembling with exhaustion and terror. The door opened. Anna stood there, her face gaunt with sleeplessness, her eyes red from crying. Behind her, Caleb could see Jacob in the bed, still and pale. "Am I too late?" The words came out broken, desperate. Anna's expression crumbled, and for one horrible moment, Caleb thought the answer was yes. Then she was in his arms, sobbing against his chest, her whole body shaking. "He's alive!" she gasped out. "Barely, but alive. Dr. Harrison said he might have hours, maybe a day. Oh God, Caleb, you made it. You actually made it." Relief so intense it felt like pain washed through him. He held Anna for just a moment, letting her tears soak his shirt, then gently set her aside and moved to the bed. Jacob looked worse than before, if that was possible. His breathing was a terrible rattling sound, his fever so high that heat radiated from his skin. But he was breathing, still fighting. "Good kid," Caleb said softly, touching Jacob's forehead. "Keep fighting just a little longer. We brought medicine." Dr. Harrison arrived within minutes of being summoned, took one look at Caleb's haggard face and the medicines he'd brought, and shook his head in amazement. "You actually did it. 4 days to Denver and back." He took the medicines, examined them carefully, then immediately began preparing them. "This is good work, Redden. You might have just saved this boy's life." The next hours were agony. Harrison administered the medicines, used the carbolic acid to help clear Jacob's lungs, gave him digitalis for his heart, used morphine to ease his pain. All they could do was wait and hope and pray that 4 days of desperate riding hadn't been for nothing. Caleb refused to leave. He sat beside Anna's chair, his hand in hers, watching Jacob's face for any sign of change. Anna leaned against him, drawing strength from his presence, occasionally dozing against his shoulder when exhaustion overwhelmed her fear. Night fell. The lamp burned low. Outside, the town settled into silence. Inside the cabin, 3 people kept vigil over a boy's life. A doctor who'd done everything he knew how to do, a sister who'd never stopped believing, and a bounty hunter who'd ridden through hell because love had finally proven stronger than the stone around his heart. Sometime near midnight, Jacob's fever broke. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden awakening, no miraculous recovery. Just a gradual cooling of his skin, a slight easing of his breathing, a subtle shift from dying to fighting. But Harrison noticed it immediately, checked his pulse, listened to his lungs, and turned to them with cautious hope. The fever's dropping, his breathing's improving, the medicines are working. Anna's grip on Caleb's hand tightened painfully. Will he? "He's not out of danger yet," Harrison cautioned. "The next 24 hours will tell us for certain. But this is the first real improvement I've seen in days. Whatever you did, Redden, however you managed that impossible ride, it might have made the difference." Caleb didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded and held Anna's hand while tears of relief streamed down both their faces. Dawn came slowly, painting the cabin in shades of gold. Jacob's breathing continued to improve through the morning, his fever dropping further, his color gradually returning. By noon, his eyes flickered open for the first time in days. "Anna?" His voice was barely a whisper, weak and confused. Anna was at his side instantly, her hand on his face, tears flowing freely. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here. Thirsty." She helped him drink just small sips of water, and Caleb watched the tenderness between them with something aching in his chest. This was what family looked like. This was what love could accomplish when it refused to give up, refused to accept loss, refused to let go even when all hope seemed gone. Jacob's eyes found Caleb standing at the foot of the bed. "Mr. Redden, you came back." "I did." "Anna said you went to Denver. For medicine." The boy's voice was getting stronger, though still frighteningly weak. "That's really far." "Not that far." "Liar," Jacob said, but he was smiling. "Thank you for not letting me die." The simple gratitude hit Caleb harder than any bullet ever had. He moved closer, sat on the edge of the bed, and ruffled Jacob's hair with a gentleness that surprised them both. "You did the real work, kid. All I did was ride fast. You're the one who kept fighting, who refused to give up." He glanced at Anna, saw the love in her eyes, and felt his stone heart crack completely open. "You're the one who gave me a reason to ride at all." Over the next 3 days, Jacob continued to improve. The medicines Caleb had brought from Denver did their work. Harrison's care proved invaluable, and Jacob's own stubborn will to live carried him through the worst. By the end of the week, he was sitting up, eating solid food, and complaining about being stuck in bed, sure signs that recovery was truly underway. Caleb stayed through all of it. He helped Anna care for Jacob, sat with the boy when Anna needed rest, told stories of his travels that carefully edited out the violence but kept the adventure. He fixed things around the cabin that needed fixing, brought in firewood, made himself useful in 100 small ways that said more clearly than words that he wasn't leaving again. One evening, after Jacob had fallen asleep and the cabin was quiet, Anna and Caleb sat at the table with coffee between them. She looked better now. The fear had left her eyes, the exhaustion had faded from her face, and something like peace had settled over her. "You saved him," she said quietly. "You rode to Denver and back in 4 days, nearly killed yourself doing it, spent all your money on medicines, and you saved my brother's life." "We saved him. You kept him alive long enough for the medicine to work. Harrison knew what to do. Jacob fought harder than most grown men could have. You just loved us enough to do the impossible." She reached across the table and took his hand. "That's not nothing, Caleb. That's everything." He looked at their joined hands, marveling at how right it felt, how natural, how completely his life had changed in just a few short weeks. From a man who'd sworn never to care about anyone again to a man who'd ride through hell for a woman and her brother. From stone heart to something softer, warmer, infinitely more fragile, but also infinitely more alive. "I meant what I said before I left," he told her. "I'm done running, done being alone, done pretending I'm something I'm not." He met her eyes. "I want to stay, Anna. Here, with you, with Jacob. Build something real, something that matters. If you'll have me." "If I'll have you?" She laughed, though tears shone in her eyes. "Caleb, I've been yours since the moment you gave me that $15 without expecting anything in return. Since the moment you sat in this cabin and let me see the real you. Since the moment you kissed me goodbye and I realized I'd never met anyone worth keeping before." "I'm not an easy man to love," he warned. "I've got ghosts, Anna, demons, a past full of blood and mistakes and things I'm not proud of. And I'm learning how to be human again, how to feel things, how to believe I deserve something good. But I'm going to make mistakes, going to fall back into old habits, going to struggle." "Then we'll struggle together." She squeezed his hand. "I've got my own ghosts, my own mistakes. We'll figure it out as we go. Help each other when it's hard, celebrate when it's good. That's what love is. Not perfection, but partnership. Not running away when things get difficult, but standing together and facing them." He wanted to kiss her, wanted to pull her into his arms and never let go, wanted to make promises about forever and mean every word. But Jacob was sleeping just a few feet away, and some things deserved privacy, deserved the right moment. "Tomorrow," he said instead, "when Jacob's stronger. I want to do this right, Anna. Court you properly, ask permission, be the kind of man you deserve instead of the kind I've been." "You're already the kind of man I deserve," she said softly. "But I'll wait for tomorrow if that's what you need." Tomorrow came with bright sunshine and Jacob strong enough to sit at the table for breakfast. He looked between his sister and Caleb with the knowing expression of a boy who wasn't quite as oblivious as adults sometimes assumed. "Are you two going to get married?" he asked bluntly around a mouthful of eggs. Anna nearly choked on her coffee. "Jacob!" "What? It's obvious. He looks at you like you're the only person in the world. You look at him the same way, and he literally rode to Denver and back to save my life. If that's not love, I don't know what is." Caleb found himself laughing, actually laughing, the sound rusty from disuse but genuine. "The kid's got a point." "He's 12, Anna protested, her cheeks flushed. "He doesn't understand." "I understand plenty," Jacob interrupted. "I understand that you've been alone since we left Boston, trying to take care of everything by yourself. I understand that Mr. Redden makes you smile in a way you haven't smiled in years. And I understand that life's short and sometimes you almost die, so maybe people should stop dancing around what they want and just say it out loud." The wisdom from a 12-year-old mouth silenced them both. Then Caleb stood, moved to where Anna sat, and held out his hand. "Walk with me?" She took his hand and let him lead her outside, leaving Jacob grinning at the table. They walked in silence to the edge of town, to a spot where the prairie stretched out forever, and the mountains rose in the distance like promises. "Jacob's right," Caleb said finally, "about all of it. I do look at you like you're the only person in the world because most days that's exactly how it feels. Like everything else is just background noise and you're the only thing that matters." "Caleb, let me finish." He turned to face her, took both her hands in his. "I came to Redemption Creek planning to leave as fast as I could. Spent 10 years avoiding exactly this, caring about someone, letting them matter, risking my heart on something as fragile as love. But you changed everything. You and Jacob both. You cracked open this stone heart I'd built and reminded me what it means to be human, to care about something beyond survival." He paused, gathering courage for what came next. "I don't have much to offer. No home, no family, no life beyond chasing bounties. But I've got $700 saved, enough to buy land or start a business or do something honest for a change. I've got 2 good hands, a strong back, and a determination to be better than I've been. And I've got a heart that's completely, terrifyingly, irreversibly yours." Anna's eyes filled with tears as he slowly dropped to one knee in the prairie grass. "So I'm asking you, Anna Grayson, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you? Will you take this broken, half-reformed bounty hunter and help him become something better?" She was crying openly now, her hands trembling in his. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it. To you, to us, to building something real together. Yes." He stood and kissed her there in the prairie grass under the wide Montana sky. And for the first time in 10 years, Caleb Redding's heart felt full instead of empty, alive instead of stone. They were so caught up in each other that they didn't notice Jacob had followed them until they heard his voice. "Finally! I thought you two would never get around to it." They broke apart, laughing, and Caleb pulled the boy into their embrace. The 3 of them stood there, a family not by blood but by choice, by love, by the desperate rides and impossible hopes that had brought them together. "So what now?" Jacob asked. "Are we going to stay in Redemption Creek?" Caleb looked at Anna, saw her nodding, and smiled. "We're going to stay. Build a life here. Anna will keep teaching, I'll find honest work, and you'll finish healing and go back to school." "What kind of honest work?" Jacob wanted to know. "Whatever needs doing, ranch hand, deputy maybe, anything that doesn't involve hunting men for money. That part of my life is over." "Good," Anna said firmly, "because I didn't fall in love with a bounty hunter. I fell in love with a man who saves 12-year-old boys and rides impossible distances and looks at me like I hung the moon." "You did hang the moon," Caleb said softly, "along with every star in the sky." Jacob made a gagging sound. "If you two are going to be this mushy all the time, I might need to move out." They laughed and walked back toward town together, and with every step, Caleb felt lighter. The ghosts weren't gone. They'd never be completely gone. Emily would always be part of him. His family would always be a wound that ached. But alongside the pain was something new, hope, joy, the absolute certainty that love was worth the risk even when the risk felt unbearable. That night, back in the cabin with Jacob asleep and Caleb preparing to return to the saloon, Anna walked him to the door. "Stay," she whispered. Not like that. Just stay. Sleep on the floor, sleep in the chair. I don't care. I just don't want to wake up wondering if you'll still be here in the morning." He understood what she was really asking, not for impropriety, but for presence. For the reassurance that he meant what he'd said, that he wasn't going to wake up and decide it had all been a mistake. So he stayed, sleeping in the chair beside the dying fire, while Anna lay in her bed and Jacob snored softly across the room. It was uncomfortable and his neck would ache in the morning, and he'd probably spent more comfortable nights on hard ground under open sky. But when dawn came and Anna's first sight was him sitting there, her smile made every minute of discomfort worth it. The cowboy's heart had turned to stone, they'd say later in Redemption Creek, until she cried in his arms and cracked it open, until her brother nearly died and he rode through hell to save him, until love proved stronger than fear, hope proved more powerful than pain, and a man who'd thought himself beyond redemption found it anyway in a cabin with a green door. The weeks that followed the proposal felt like learning to walk after years of crawling. Caleb moved through each day with the careful attention of a man discovering what normal life looked like, what it meant to wake up with purpose beyond survival, what it felt like to have people who expected him home at the end of each day. He took a job as deputy sheriff, working alongside Tom Bridger, who'd been quietly hoping for exactly this outcome since the day Caleb had first ridden into town. The work was different from bounty hunting, less about the chase and more about keeping peace, mediating disputes between miners over claims, breaking up Saturday night brawls at the saloon, helping Mrs. Patterson when her chickens escaped again. Simple work, honest work, the kind that let him sleep without his gun in his hand for the first time in a decade. Anna continued teaching, and Caleb found himself stopping by the schoolhouse some afternoons, ostensibly to check on things, but really just to watch her work. She had a gift for it, a patience with the children that amazed him, a way of making even the most reluctant student believe they could learn. He'd sit in the back row, hat in his hands, and listen to her explain geography or arithmetic, and think about how lucky he was that this brilliant, beautiful woman had chosen him. Jacob recovered completely, his strength returning day by day until he was back to being a normal 12-year-old boy, full of energy, questions, and mischief. He took to following Caleb around town when school let out, pestering him with questions about tracking and horses and what it was like to face down dangerous men. Caleb answered what he could, edited what he should, and found himself becoming something he'd never expected to be. A mentor, almost a father figure to this boy who'd nearly died twice. But not everything was easy. Some nights, Caleb woke from nightmares about Emily, about the war, about all the men he'd killed in 10 years of hunting. He'd sit up gasping, reaching for weapons that weren't there, his heart racing with remembered fear. Anna learned to recognize those nights, would appear at his door with tea and quiet presence, sitting with him until the demons faded back into the dark corners where they lived. And some days, the weight of staying in one place felt suffocating. The urge to ride out, to disappear into the territory where no one knew him and expectations didn't exist, would hit so hard that Caleb had to physically stop himself from saddling Rust. Those were the days when Anna would take his hand and say nothing, just hold on until the urge passed, until he remembered why staying was worth the discomfort of being known. 3 weeks after the proposal, Caleb rode out to a piece of land 5 miles from town, 20 acres with a creek running through it, good grass for horses, a stand of pine trees that would provide timber for building. The old prospector who owned it was heading to California and willing to sell cheap. Caleb looked at that land and saw not just earth and trees, but possibility. A home. A future. A place where he and Anna and Jacob could build something permanent. He bought it with $400 of his saved money, signed papers that felt more binding than any promise he'd ever made, and rode back to town with a deed in his pocket and hope in his chest. That evening, he spread the deed on Anna's table while Jacob looked on with wide eyes. "I bought us land," Caleb said simply. 20 acres, creek running through it, enough room for a house and barn, and maybe some horses. I thought," he paused, suddenly uncertain. "I thought we could build something there. Together, if you want." Anna stared at the deed, her eyes filling with tears. "You bought us land." "I did. Unless you'd rather stay in town, keep the cabin." "No." She looked up at him, and the love in her eyes took his breath away. "No, I want this. Want to build a home with you, plant roots, watch things grow. Her voice broke. "I never thought I'd have this again. A real home, a real future. After Boston, after everything fell apart, I thought I'd spend the rest of my life just surviving." "No more surviving," Caleb said firmly, taking her hands. "We're living now, all of us." "Can I have a horse?" Jacob asked hopefully. "If we're going to have land with room for horses, I should probably have one." "You can have a horse when you can pay for its feed," Anna said, but she was smiling. "That's not fair. Caleb has 2 horses." Caleb earned his horses tracking dangerous men across hostile territory. "You earn yours by doing your schoolwork and chores without complaint for 6 months. Jacob groaned dramatically, but didn't actually argue. He'd learned that his sister's rules were non-negotiable, even if his soon-to-be brother-in-law might be more lenient. The next day, Caleb started building. He'd learned carpentry from his father before the war, skills he'd barely used in 10 years of drifting. But the knowledge came back as he worked: how to square a foundation, frame walls, fit joints so they'd hold against Montana winters. Other men from town volunteered to help, grateful for the bounty hunter who'd become a lawman, who'd saved the schoolteacher's brother, who'd proven that even the hardest men could soften given the right reasons. They worked through the summer heat, raising walls and setting roof beams. Anna brought lunch on days when school wasn't in session, and Caleb would stop work to eat with her, sitting in the shade of the half-built house and talking about their plans. Where the kitchen would be, how many rooms they'd need, whether to build a covered porch for evening sitting. Simple conversations, domestic and ordinary, exactly what Caleb had spent 10 years avoiding and now craved with an intensity that still surprised him. But even as the house took shape, even as their future became visible in wood and nails, darkness waited to test their newfound happiness. It came on a Saturday afternoon in late August, when Caleb was in the sheriff's office reviewing wanted posters. A stranger rode into town, tall, lean, with cold eyes and a gun worn low. Caleb recognized the type immediately, had been that type for too many years. This was a hunter, come looking for prey. The stranger tied his horse outside the saloon and came straight to the sheriff's office. He pushed through the door without knocking, his gaze fixing on Caleb with obvious recognition. "Caleb Redden," the stranger said, his voice flat and emotionless. "Been looking for you." Caleb stood slowly, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun. "Who's asking?" "Name's Wade Hollister. Jack, Sam, and Tom Hollister were my brothers." Ice flooded Caleb's veins. The Hollister brothers, the stagecoach robbers he'd brought in months ago, the men who'd started everything, whose bounty had given him the money to help Anna, whose capture had forced him to stay in Redemption Creek long enough to fall in love. "Your brothers are in territorial prison," Caleb said carefully, "getting what they deserve for robbery and attempted murder." "My brothers are dead," Wade corrected, his voice dropping even lower. "Killed 2 weeks ago in a prison riot, stabbed by another inmate while guards looked the other way." His hand hovered over his gun. "You put them there. You tracked them down, brought them in, took away their freedom. So their blood is on your hands, Redden. They made their choices, and now you'll pay for yours." Wade's eyes held the particular emptiness Caleb knew too well, the look of a man with nothing left to lose, nothing left but revenge. "I'm calling you out. Right now, in the street, just you and me, the way these things are supposed to be settled." Sheriff Bridger had appeared in the doorway, his hand on his own gun. "This is my town, Hollister. We don't settle disputes with gunfights in the street. You have a grievance. You take it to court. Court didn't save my brothers. Court put them in that prison where they died like dogs." Wade's gaze never left Caleb. "I'm not leaving until one of us is dead, Redden. You can face me like a man, or I can start shooting up this town until you do. Either way, we're settling this today." Caleb felt the familiar coldness settling over him, the hunter's instinct that had kept him alive for 10 years. Part of him, the part that had never fully transformed, that still remembered every draw and every kill, assessed the situation with brutal clarity. Wade Hollister was fast, probably very fast, but Caleb was faster. He could win this fight, eliminate the threat, protect the town. But another part of him, the part Anna had awakened, the part that had learned to value life over death, recoiled from the thought. He'd promised himself he was done with killing, done with violence, done being the man with blood on his hands. He'd sworn to build something better, to be someone Anna and Jacob could be proud of. "Stand down, Hollister," Bridger said, moving between them. "I won't have murder in my streets." "Then stop me," Wade said simply, and drew. Everything happened in the space of a heartbeat. Wade's gun cleared leather, swinging toward Caleb. Bridger lunged forward, trying to intervene, and Caleb's own hand moved with the practiced speed of 10,000 draws, his Colt appearing in his palm like magic, his finger tightening on the trigger. Time slowed. Caleb saw Wade's gun coming up, saw the hammer pulling back, saw death approaching with mechanical precision. His own gun was already aimed, already steady, already a split second from firing the shot that would end this threat permanently. But in that frozen moment, he saw something else. Saw Anna's face when he told her he was done with killing. Saw Jacob looking at him with hero worship and trust. Saw the house they were building together, the life they were creating, the future that depended on him being someone different than he'd been. Saw that killing Wade Hollister, justified or not, would be a step backward into darkness he'd fought so hard to escape. His aim shifted. Instead of center mass, instead of the killing shot his instincts demanded, he aimed lower, fired once. The bullet took Wade in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun flying. The man collapsed with a cry of pain and rage, clutching his wounded shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Bridger had his own gun out now, covering Wade, while Caleb kept his Colt trained on the wounded man. The street had erupted in chaos, people running for cover, voices shouting, the particular panic that accompanied gunfire in town. "You son of a bitch!" Wade gasped, his face twisted with pain. "You were supposed to kill me. I wanted you to kill me." And there it was, the truth beneath the revenge. Wade Hollister hadn't come for justice. He'd come for death, for an end to grief so overwhelming that dying seemed easier than living with it. Caleb knew that feeling, had lived with it for 10 years, had nearly chosen it himself more times than he could count. He holstered his gun and knelt beside Wade, ignoring Bridger's warning. Up close, he could see the man was younger than he'd first appeared, maybe 25, with eyes that had seen too much and a face ravaged by loss. "Your brothers made bad choices," Caleb said quietly. "I'm sorry they died. But their choices don't have to be yours. You don't have to die here today." "I got nothing left," Wade said, and the despair in his voice was achingly familiar. "They were all the family I had, all that mattered. With them gone, what's the point? The point is that life goes on, even when we think it can't. The point is that grief doesn't have to define you. The point is—" Caleb paused, thinking about Anna, about Jacob, about the house taking shape on 20 acres of Montana land. "The point is that even when everything seems lost, sometimes second chances appear if you're brave enough to take them." Wade stared at him, blood dripping from his shoulder, confusion and pain warring on his face. "Why didn't you kill me? You had the shot." "Because I'm not that man anymore," Caleb said simply. "And I don't think you really want to be him either." Doc Harrison arrived to tend Wade's shoulder while Bridger hauled the young man to the jail. The gunshot wound was clean. The bullet had passed through muscle without hitting bone or major vessels. Wade would heal, would stand trial for attempted murder, would likely spend a few years in prison if he was lucky. But he'd be alive. Would have time to grieve his brothers, to figure out who he was beyond their shadow, to decide whether he wanted to spend his life chasing revenge or building something better. Caleb watched them go, his hand trembling slightly as the adrenaline faded. He'd come so close to killing again, so close to reverting to the man he'd been. 1 second's difference in aim, one choice to prioritize survival over principle, and Wade Hollister would be dead in the street. "That was good shooting," Bridger said, returning from the jail. "Most men would have aimed for center mass, asked questions later. You chose different." "Yeah. Why?" Caleb looked toward the schoolhouse, where Anna was probably keeping the children calm after the gunfire, explaining that everything was fine, that sometimes bad things happen, but the law was there to protect them. "Because someone taught me that being a good man means choosing the hard path, not the easy one. Means being better than your worst instincts, even when your worst instincts might keep you safer." Bridger nodded slowly. "She's good for you, Redden. Both of them are. You're becoming someone worth knowing. Trying to be." That evening, after the town had settled and the story of the gunfight had made its rounds, Caleb walked to the cabin with the green door. Anna opened it before he could knock, pulled him inside, and held him so tightly he could barely breathe. "I heard," she said against his chest. "I heard there was shooting, that someone came for you, that you—" She pulled back, her hands framing his face, her eyes searching his. "Tom said you could have killed him, but chose not to. Is that true?" "It's true." "Why?" The same question Bridger had asked, the same question Caleb was still asking himself. He took Anna's hands in his, needing the contact, the reminder of why choosing differently had mattered. "Because killing him would have been easy," he said finally. "Would have been what the old me did without thinking, without hesitation." But the old me was dead inside, Anna. Stone heart, remember? And I don't want to be him anymore. Want to be the man you see when you look at me, the man Jacob thinks I am. And that man doesn't kill unless there's absolutely no other choice. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You could have died. If your aim had been off, if he'd been faster. I wasn't off, and he wasn't faster. Caleb pulled her close again, breathing in the lavender scent of her hair. I'm here. I'm alive. And I'm still the man who wants to marry you, build a house with you, spend the rest of my life being worthy of you. You're already worthy, she whispered fiercely. You've always been worthy. Jacob appeared from behind the table where he had apparently been listening. That was really brave what you did, not killing him even though you could have. It was necessary, Caleb corrected. Not sure about brave. It was both. Jacob came closer, looking up at Caleb with an expression too serious for a 12-year-old. My father used to say that any man can pull a trigger, but it takes a real man to know when not to. I think he'd have liked you, Mr. Redden. The words hit Caleb hard, reminding him of another father, another time, another life when such praise would have meant something. I think I'd have liked him too, kid. They sat together that evening, the three of them, talking about the day's events, about Wade Hollister and the burden of grief, about choices and consequences, and the difficulty of being better than your worst self. It was the kind of conversation Caleb had never had before. Honest, vulnerable, built on foundation of trust and love, rather than the careful distance he'd maintained for so long. Later, after Jacob had gone to bed, Anna walked Caleb to the door. The night was cool, stars scattered across the sky like spilled diamonds, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to its mate. The house is almost finished, Caleb said, leaning against the doorframe. Another 2 weeks, maybe 3, and it'll be ready. We could get married then, move in together, make it official. We could get married tomorrow and I'd move into a tent if that's what we had, Anna replied, her hand finding his. The house is wonderful, Caleb, but it's not what I'm marrying. I'm marrying you. The man who rode to Denver to save my brother, who chose not to kill when killing would have been easier, who's learning how to feel again despite how much it scares him. It terrifies me, he admitted quietly. Every day. Caring this much about someone, about multiple someones, knowing that losing you would destroy me worse than anything that came before. Building this life that feels so fragile, so easily shattered. Life is fragile, Anna said, stepping closer until they were almost touching. Love is risky. Loss is always possible. But the alternative is what you had before. Stone heart, empty days, existence without meaning. And I refuse to believe that's better than this, than us, than choosing to love despite the risk. She was right, of course. She was always right about the things that mattered most. Caleb pulled her into his arms, held her close, and let himself feel the full weight of his love for her. Terrifying, overwhelming, absolutely worth every moment of fear it brought. Marry me next week, he said suddenly. Don't wait for the house to be finished. Marry me as soon as we can arrange it, and we'll figure out the rest as we go. Anna pulled back just enough to look at him, surprise and joy lighting her face. Next week? Unless that's too soon. It's perfect. She laughed, the sound pure and bright. It's absolutely perfect. They were married 7 days later in the small church with the crooked steeple, the whole town turning out to witness the union of the reformed bounty hunter and the Boston schoolteacher. Anna wore a simple dress she'd altered herself, cream-colored with lace at the collar, her hair pinned up with wild flowers Jacob had picked that morning. Caleb wore new clothes bought for the occasion, dark trousers, white shirt, a vest that still felt too formal but made Anna smile when she saw him. Sheriff Bridger stood as Caleb's best man, and Doc Harrison gave Anna away since she had no father to perform the duty. Jacob sat in the front row, grinning so widely his face must have hurt, obviously pleased with himself for the role he'd played in bringing them together. The ceremony was simple, the words traditional, but when the preacher asked if Caleb would take Anna as his wife, his voice cracked with emotion as he said, "I will." And when Anna said the same, her blue eyes locked on his face, Caleb felt something shift fundamentally inside him. The last pieces of stone crumbling away, replaced by something warm and alive and infinitely more valuable. They kissed as husband and wife, and the church erupted in applause. People Caleb barely knew clapped him on the back, wished them well, talked about the party planned at the saloon. He accepted their congratulations with genuine warmth, surprised by how much it meant to be welcomed, to be accepted, to be part of a community instead of always passing through. The celebration lasted into the evening. Food, music, dancing that Caleb protested he didn't know how to do until Anna pulled him onto the floor and showed him it was easier than he'd thought. They swayed together while someone played a fiddle, her head against his chest, his arms around her, and Caleb thought about the long, dark years that had led to this moment. Every loss, every hunt, every lonely night had somehow been a path leading here. To this woman, this town, this chance at redemption he'd never expected to receive. The thought should have been comforting, should have made the past make sense. But late that night, lying in a room at the boarding house Mrs. Henderson had prepared for them, Anna asleep in his arms and moonlight streaming through the window, Caleb found himself thinking not about the past, but about the terrifying fragility of the present. He had everything now. A wife he loved beyond measure, a boy who'd become like a son, a home being built, a future stretching out with possibility, which meant he had everything to lose. Every moment of happiness was shadowed by the knowledge that loss was always one accident away, one illness away, one moment of bad luck away from shattering everything. Anna stirred in her sleep, her hand finding his chest, her breath warm against his neck. And Caleb made a decision in that quiet moment. He would love her anyway. Would love Jacob anyway. Would build their life and protect their future with everything he had, knowing full well it might not be enough. Knowing that loving them gave them the power to destroy him. Because the alternative was going back to being the man with the stone heart, and that man had been dead long before Anna Grayson cracked him open and taught him to live again. The next weeks passed in a blur of finishing the house, moving their meager possessions into rooms that smelled of fresh pine and new beginnings, arranging furniture and hanging curtains, and making a house into a home. Jacob chose the smaller bedroom, declaring he needed less space since he'd be outside most of the time anyway. Anna claimed the kitchen as her domain, though she insisted Caleb learn to cook at least a few basic meals so she wouldn't have to do all the work. They settled into married life with surprising ease, finding rhythms that worked for them. Caleb worked his deputy shifts, helped neighboring ranchers with problems, slowly built a reputation as a fair lawman who preferred talking to shooting. Anna continued teaching, came home to cook supper, spent evenings grading papers while Caleb repaired things around the property. Jacob studied, did chores, and pestered Caleb to teach him tracking skills that Caleb reluctantly agreed to share. It was normal, domestic, exactly the kind of life Caleb had never imagined wanting, and now couldn't imagine living without. But autumn brought with it a test that would push their newfound happiness to its breaking point. Jacob had been healthy for months, strong and energetic and showing no signs of the illness that had nearly killed him. But one October morning he woke coughing, just a small cough. Nothing alarming, probably just a cold from the changing weather. Anna tried not to worry. Caleb tried to be reassuring, but both of them heard the echo of those terrible days in spring, remembered how quickly a simple cough had turned into pneumonia, how close they'd come to losing him. By the second day, the cough was worse. By the third, Jacob had a fever. By the fourth, Anna's calm facade had cracked completely, her fear rising like floodwater, threatening to drown them all. "It's just a cold," Dr. Harrison said after examining Jacob. "His lungs sound clear, the fever's mild, nothing like before." "You don't know that," Anna said, her voice sharp with barely controlled panic. "You said he'd be fine before, and he nearly died. Twice." Mrs. Redden," Harrison corrected himself, still adjusting to her new name. "I understand your fear, but Jacob is stronger now. His lungs have healed, and this illness shows none of the warning signs of pneumonia. I truly believe he'll be fine." But Anna couldn't believe it. The fear that had taken root during those terrible days had grown deep, and now every cough from Jacob's room sent her spiraling into remembered horror. She barely slept, checking on him every hour, her hand constantly reaching for his forehead to check his temperature. Caleb watched her deteriorating with helpless frustration. He tried to comfort her, tried to remind her that Harrison knew his business, tried to point out that Jacob was actually doing better each day despite her fears. But Anna couldn't hear it. The trauma of nearly losing her brother had carved something permanent into her psyche, left her unable to trust that good things could last, that the people she loved weren't always one breath away from being taken from her. On the fifth night, Caleb found her in Jacob's room at 2 in the morning, sitting beside his bed with tears streaming silently down her face while the boy slept peacefully. "Anna," he said softly from the doorway, "come to bed. You need rest." "What if he stops breathing?" she whispered. "What if I go to sleep and he stops breathing and I'm not here to help him?" "He's not going to stop breathing. Harrison said—" "Harrison doesn't know everything." Her voice rose, sharp with desperation. "He said Jacob would be fine before, and he wasn't fine. He almost died, Caleb. In my arms, he almost died, and I can't—" She broke down completely, sobs shaking her shoulders. "I can't go through that again. I can't watch him die. I'd rather die myself than watch him die." Caleb crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, feeling her pain like it was his own. This was what he'd feared, not loss itself, but the waiting for loss, the constant terror that happiness was temporary, that loving someone meant living in perpetual fear of losing them. "Listen to me," he said firmly, his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Jacob is not dying. He has a cold, nothing more. Yes, it's scary. Yes, it reminds us of what happened before, but we can't let fear destroy the good things we have now." "How do you do it?" Anna demanded, pulling away from him. "How do you care about us without being terrified every second? You've lost people before, lost them in terrible ways. How are you not paralyzed with fear that it'll happen again?" The question cut deep because she was right. He was terrified. Every single day, the fear lurked in the back of his mind, whispering that this was too good to last, that loving them this much meant their loss would annihilate him. "I am terrified," he admitted quietly, "every moment. But I made a choice, Anna. Made it the night you cracked my stone heart open and showed me what living actually meant. I chose to love you anyway, to love Jacob anyway, knowing full well it might destroy me. Because the alternative, going back to being empty, being dead inside, being safe but alone, that's not living. That's just surviving, and I'm done with survival." "But what if—" "There is no what if," he interrupted gently. "There's only now. Right now, Jacob is sleeping peacefully in that bed. Right now, his fever is gone and his lungs are clear. Right now, we have a home and a life and each other. That's all we get, Anna, just right now. And we can either spend it paralyzed with fear about what might happen, or we can trust that we're strong enough to face whatever comes." She stared at him, her face ravaged by sleeplessness and fear. And slowly, so slowly, he saw something shift in her expression. Acceptance, maybe. Or simply exhaustion too profound to fight anymore. "I don't know how to stop being afraid," she whispered. "Neither do I," he admitted. "But maybe we figure it out together. Maybe every morning we wake up and choose to trust instead of fear. Choose to live instead of just exist. Choose to believe that love is worth the risk, even when the risk feels unbearable." Anna collapsed against him, crying in great heaving sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and wounded. Caleb held her through it all, his own eyes burning with unshed tears, his heart aching for the pain she carried, for the trauma that had carved itself so deeply. They stood like that for long minutes while Jacob slept on, oblivious to the emotional storm raging beside his bed. Finally, Anna's sobs quieted to hiccups, then to silence. She pulled back, wiped her eyes, and looked at her brother with something closer to peace. "He's really okay," she said, not quite a question. "He's really okay. And if he's not, if something does happen, then we face it together," Caleb said firmly. "You don't carry that fear alone anymore, Anna. You have me. Whatever comes, whatever happens, we face it as a family. You, me, and that stubborn kid who refuses to die no matter how hard fate tries." She laughed, the sound watery but genuine. "He is stubborn, isn't he? Wonder where he gets it." Anna let Caleb lead her back to their bedroom, let him tuck her into bed, let exhaustion finally claim her. And when she woke late the next morning to find Jacob downstairs eating breakfast and complaining about missing school, the relief on her face was worth every sleepless hour. The cold passed within a week, leaving Jacob healthy and Anna slowly rebuilding the trust that trauma had shattered. It was a process, Not a single moment, learning to believe again that good things could last, that the people she loved weren't always on the verge of being taken from her. But she learned it day by day, with Caleb beside her reminding her to choose trust over fear, to choose life over mere survival. November brought the first snow, blanketing their 20 acres in white and turning the world into something quiet and clean. Caleb stood on their porch one morning, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over snow-covered hills, and felt something he'd never expected to feel again. Peace. Not the absence of fear. The fear would always be there, whispering that this was too good to last. But peace, despite the fear. Contentment, even knowing how fragile happiness could be. Joy in the present moment rather than constant worry about the future. Anna joined him on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, her own coffee steaming in the cold air. She leaned against his side, fitting perfectly under his arm, and together they watched the day begin. "Do you miss it?" she asked quietly. "The hunting, the traveling, the freedom of not being tied down?" Caleb considered the question carefully. Did he miss the open road? Sometimes. Did he miss the simplicity of tracking men for money? Occasionally. Did he miss the stone heart that had made loneliness bearable? No, he said finally, and meant it completely. I don't miss any of it. He gestured to the house behind them, to the land around them, to her beside him. This is what I was missing all those years without knowing it. Purpose, connection, a reason to wake up beyond simple survival. You gave me that, Anna. You and Jacob both. Gave me back my life when I thought it was already over. She turned to look up at him, her blue eyes bright in the morning light. We gave each other life. You saved Jacob, yes, but you saved me too. Saved me from believing I was alone, that I had to carry everything by myself, that no one would ever see past my fear to the person underneath. He kissed her there on the porch, slow and deep, pouring everything he couldn't say into that kiss. When they pulled apart, she was smiling, and the sight of her happiness made every difficult choice, every moment of fear, every step away from his old life feel worth it. I love you, Caleb Redden, she said softly. Stone heart and all. No stone left, he replied, his hand over his chest where his heart beat strong and steady. You cracked it all away. Now it's just flesh and blood and terrifyingly vulnerable to everything that might hurt it, but I wouldn't change it for anything. They stood together watching the snow fall, two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd chosen love despite its risks, who'd built something real and permanent in a world that specialized in taking things away. Inside, they could hear Jacob moving around, probably getting ready for school. Normal sounds, domestic sounds, the kind that once would have made Caleb run for the hills. Now they sounded like home. And for the first time in 10 years, Caleb Redden wasn't running from anything. He was standing still, arms around his wife, heart full of love and fear and hope all tangled together, choosing every day to believe that this life, this love, this fragile, beautiful, terrifying happiness was worth every risk it brought. The cowboy's heart had turned to stone until she cried in his arms and cracked it open. And what emerged from that cracking wasn't the man he'd been before tragedy, wasn't the boy who'd left Virginia with hope in his heart. It was someone new, someone tempered by loss but opened by love, someone who knew darkness intimately but chose light anyway, someone who understood that being vulnerable was the bravest thing a person could do. The days ahead would bring their challenges. Nothing this good lasted without being tested. But whatever came, they'd face it together, husband, wife, and the boy who'd brought them together by refusing to die when death seemed inevitable. And that, Caleb thought as Anna's hand found his, as Jacob's voice called from inside asking what was for breakfast, as the snow fell soft and silent around their home, was more than enough. It was everything. Winter deepened across Montana territory, and with it came a quiet settling into the rhythms of their new life. Caleb worked his deputy shifts through snow and cold, broke up disputes between miners driven half mad by cabin fever, and found himself becoming someone the townspeople trusted, not just to enforce the law, but to understand it with compassion. Anna taught through the worst of winter, her schoolhouse warm with a stove Caleb kept supplied with wood, her students bundled in coats and scarves as they learned their letters and numbers. And Jacob grew stronger every day, shooting up in height until he was nearly as tall as his sister, his voice beginning to crack with the approach of manhood. He helped Caleb with evening chores, learned to track deer through fresh snow, absorbed every lesson about reading land and weather, and the thousand small skills that meant survival in this hard country. They were happy, not perfectly, not without struggles, but genuinely, deeply happy in the way that comes from choosing each other every day, from building something real together, from learning to trust that good things could last even when experience suggested otherwise. But fate, it seemed, had one more test waiting for them. It came in late February, on a night so cold that frost painted intricate patterns on the windows and breath turned to ice crystals in the air. Anna had been feeling tired for weeks, fighting nausea that she attributed to something she'd eaten, sleeping more than usual and blaming it on the shortened winter days. But that night, when she collapsed in the kitchen while preparing supper, when Caleb caught her before she hit the floor and felt how warm her skin was despite the cold house, fear crashed through him with devastating force. "Anna!" He lowered her carefully to the floor, his hand on her face, her pulse racing under his fingers. "Jacob, get Doc Harrison, now!" The boy ran without question, disappearing into the night while Caleb carried Anna to their bed. She was semi-conscious, murmuring words he couldn't understand, her body trembling. He'd seen this before. The fever, the weakness, the particular way illness could turn a healthy person fragile in moments. "Not Anna," his mind screamed. "Please, not Anna. Take anything else. Anyone else, but not her." Harrison arrived within 20 minutes, snow-dusting his coat, his medical bag in hand. He examined Anna with practiced efficiency while Caleb stood frozen beside the bed, watching the doctor's face for any sign of what was happening. "How long has she been feeling poorly?" Harrison asked, checking her pulse, listening to her breathing. "Weeks," Caleb managed. "Tired, nauseous. We thought it was just winter, maybe something she ate." "And you didn't think to call me sooner?" Harrison's voice was sharp with frustration. "She said she was fine, said it was nothing." Caleb's hands clenched into fists. "What's wrong with her, Doc? Is it pneumonia? Something worse?" Harrison straightened from his examination, his expression complicated. Concern mixed with something else that Caleb couldn't immediately identify. "She's very sick, that's certain. High fever, elevated heart rate, signs of infection. But Caleb..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She's also pregnant. About 3 months along, I'd estimate." The words hit like a physical blow. Pregnant. Anna was carrying their child. They were going to be parents. The news should have been joyous, overwhelming in the best possible way. Instead, all Caleb could think was that pregnancy made everything more dangerous, that whatever was making her sick could harm the baby, that he might lose not just Anna, but the child they'd created together. "Will she be okay?" His voice came out rough, broken. "The baby..." "I don't know yet," Harrison admitted with brutal honesty. "The fever is dangerously high. If I can't bring it down, if the infection spreads..." He didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. Jacob appeared in the doorway, his face white with fear. "Is she going to die?" "No," Caleb said with more certainty than he felt. "She's not going to die. We won't let her." Harrison began treatment immediately, cold compresses to bring down the fever, medicines from his bag, instructions for care that Caleb absorbed with desperate attention. But as the night wore on and Anna's fever climbed higher, as she began to thrash and cry out in delirium, Caleb felt his carefully constructed world threatening to shatter completely. He'd survived losing Emily, losing his family, surviving 10 years of emptiness because he'd had nothing left to lose. But now he had everything: Anna, Jacob, a home, a future, a child growing inside the woman he loved more than his own life. The thought of losing any of it, especially Anna, was unbearable in a way that went beyond words. "Talk to her," Harrison instructed. "Sometimes they can hear you even when they seem unconscious. Let her know you're here, that she's not alone." So Caleb talked. He sat beside Anna's bed, holding her hand, feeling the fever burning through her skin, and told her everything. About how much he loved her, how she'd saved him from himself, how he couldn't imagine living without her, about the baby growing inside her, about the family they were becoming, about all the years ahead they still needed to live together. "You have to fight," he whispered, his lips against her burning forehead. Just like you fought for Jacob, just like you fought to build a life here. You have to fight now, Anna. For me, for our baby, for all the days we haven't lived yet. Please. Jacob sat on the other side of the bed, holding his sister's other hand, tears streaming down his face. Don't leave me, he said quietly. You're all the family I have. You can't leave me. She has both of us, Caleb corrected, his arm going around the boy's shoulders. We're her family, and families don't give up on each other. The night stretched endlessly. Anna's fever spiked higher, high enough that Harrison's face grew grim with worry. She convulsed once, her body seizing, and Caleb had to hold her down while Jacob sobbed and Harrison worked frantically to stabilize her. This was what he'd feared most. Not death in battle, not violence from dangerous men, but the slow horror of watching someone he loved slip away despite everything he could do to stop it. The helplessness was suffocating, crushing, infinitely worse than any physical pain he'd ever endured. Somewhere around 3 a.m, at the darkest point of night when hope felt impossible, Anna's fever finally began to break. The change was subtle at first, a slight cooling of her skin, a steadying of her pulse, a deepening of her breathing from labored gasps to something more natural. Harrison checked her carefully, allowing himself a cautious smile. The fever's dropping, the crisis is passing. She's still very weak, still needs careful monitoring, but I think... He looked at Caleb's ravaged face and spoke with conviction. I think she's going to make it. Caleb's legs gave out. He collapsed beside the bed, his head on Anna's chest, listening to the steady beat of her heart, and wept like he hadn't wept since Emily's death. Relief, fear, love, gratitude, everything he'd been holding back through the long night poured out in great, racking sobs that shook his whole body. Jacob wrapped his arms around Caleb from behind, the boy crying too, and they stayed like that until the tears finally exhausted themselves. When Caleb could breathe again, could think again, he looked up at Harrison through blurred vision. The baby? Heartbeat strong. I think they both weathered this storm. Harrison packed his instruments with tired satisfaction. She'll need complete rest for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer. No work, no stress, just rest and recovery. Can you manage that? I'll carry her myself if she tries to do anything more strenuous than breathe, Caleb said fiercely. Good. I'll check on her tomorrow. Send for me immediately if anything changes. Harrison paused at the door. You did well tonight, Caleb. Both of you. Kept her fighting when she wanted to give up. That matters more than any medicine I could give. When the doctor left, Caleb climbed carefully into bed beside Anna, holding her close, feeling her chest rise and fall with each breath. Jacob curled up in a chair beside the bed, refusing to leave, and eventually sleep claimed all 3 of them as dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Anna woke late the next morning, confused and weak, but blessedly clear-eyed. Caleb was there immediately, his hand on her face, his voice breaking as he said her name. What happened? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. You were sick, very sick. You've been unconscious for almost 12 hours. He helped her drink water, his hands shaking. Do you remember anything? I remember starting supper, and then... She frowned. Nothing. Just darkness and voices, yours and Jacob's, telling me to fight. Her hand went to her stomach. Doc Harrison told me something. Something about... You're pregnant, Caleb said softly. 3 months. We're going to have a baby, Anna. Her eyes widened, tears spilling over. A baby! We're having a baby! Then fear crossed her face. But if I was sick, if the fever was high, the baby's fine. Harrison says the heartbeat is strong. He took her hand, pressed it to his lips. You're both fine. You scared 10 years off my life, but you're both fine. She started crying then, and Caleb held her carefully, mindful of how fragile she still was, while Jacob woke and scrambled to his sister's side. You came back, the boy said, his voice thick with emotion. I was so scared you wouldn't come back. I'm not going anywhere, Anna promised, touching his face. You're stuck with me, little brother. Not so little anymore, Caleb pointed out, noting Jacob's height. Kid's nearly tall as you now. Still my little brother, Anna insisted, then looked between them. Thank you for fighting for me, for not giving up. I heard you, both of you, pulling me back. Recovery was slow. Anna chafed at being confined to bed, argued that she needed to get back to teaching, insisted she was fine despite obvious exhaustion. But Caleb was immovable, enforcing Harrison's orders with gentle firmness, carrying her when she tried to do too much, reminding her that resting wasn't weakness but necessary care for herself and their baby. The news of the pregnancy spread through Redemption Creek like wildfire. Women brought food, offered advice, shared their own stories of pregnancy and childbirth. Men congratulated Caleb with backslaps and jokes about sleepless nights ahead. The town embraced them completely, celebrating their growing family as if it belonged to everyone. Sheriff Bridger hired a temporary teacher to cover Anna's classes, waving away her protests about the expense. "Town takes care of its own," he said simply. "You took care of our children, now we take care of yours." As winter thawed into early spring, Anna's strength returned gradually. Her belly began to show, the subtle rounding that announced new life growing. And with her physical recovery came emotional reckoning with how close they'd come to losing everything. One evening in March, when the snow had mostly melted and the first green shoots were appearing, Anna and Caleb sat on their porch watching the sunset. She leaned against him, his hand resting on her growing belly, and spoke the thoughts she'd been carrying. "I was so angry at first," she said quietly. "When I woke up and realized what happened, realized I could have died and taken our baby with me. I was angry at my body for failing, angry at fate for testing us again, angry that we can't just be happy without something terrible threatening to take it all away." "I know the feeling," Caleb said, thinking of his own rage at the universe for its cruelty. "But then I realized something." She turned to look at him, her blue eyes clear in the fading light. "Every terrible thing that's happened to us, every loss, every fear, every moment we thought we couldn't survive, those things made us who we are, made us strong enough to appreciate what we have, made us brave enough to love despite the risk. Doesn't make the terrible things hurt less." "No," she agreed, "but maybe it makes them meaningful. My father's death and debts brought me to Montana. Jacob's first illness brought you into our lives. My sickness reminded us how precious each day is. All of it, the pain, the fear, the near losses. All of it was part of the path that led us here, to this moment, to this family we're building." Caleb thought about that, about the long road that had brought him from Virginia battlefields to a Montana porch, about Emily's death that had turned his heart to stone, and Anna's tears that had cracked it open again. About 10 years of hunting men to avoid feeling anything, and the boy whose illness had forced him to feel everything. "I used to think the universe was cruel," he said slowly, "random and meaningless and designed to hurt us. But maybe—" He paused, the thought forming as he spoke. "Maybe it's not cruel. Maybe it's just complicated. Maybe every terrible thing carries the seed of something better, if we're strong enough to keep living, keep hoping, keep choosing love, even when love feels impossible." "That's beautiful," Anna said softly. Who knew the bounty hunter with the stone heart was actually a philosopher? "I'm not—" He stopped at her smile, realized she was teasing. "You're making fun of me." "Only a little." She kissed him, slow and sweet. "I love you, Caleb Redden. Every complicated, philosophical, formerly stone-hearted part of you." Jacob appeared from inside, having finished his evening chores. "Are you two being mushy again? Because I'm eating supper inside if you are." "We're always mushy," Anna informed him. "Get used to it. Once the baby comes, we'll probably be even worse." "Great," Jacob said, but he was smiling. "At least the baby will be too young to be embarrassed." They ate supper together, the three of them, talking about plans for the approaching spring. Jacob wanted to plant a garden, grow vegetables they could sell in town. Anna wanted to expand the house, add a room for the baby, and maybe another for Jacob as he got older. Caleb talked about buying more land, raising horses, building something that would last beyond their lifetimes. Dreams and plans, the kind that only made sense when you believed in a future, when you'd learned to trust that good things could last even when experience suggested otherwise. Spring arrived in earnest, painting the prairie in wildflowers and green grass. Anna's belly grew round and unmistakable, and with it came the particular discomforts of late pregnancy, swollen ankles, backaches, the inability to find comfortable sleeping positions. But she glowed with health and happiness, radiating joy that infected everyone around her. Caleb found himself touching her belly constantly, amazed by the life growing inside. When the baby started kicking, he'd spend hours with his hand pressed against her stomach, feeling those tiny movements, marveling that something so small could already be so strong. "What should we name it?" Anna asked one evening, the baby particularly active under Caleb's palm. "Haven't thought about it." "Liar. I've seen you thinking about it. What names have you considered?" He was quiet for a moment, thinking about names that mattered, about the people who'd shaped their journey. "For a boy, Jacob, after your brother, and because it means someone who struggles with God and prevails. Feels appropriate for this family." Anna's eyes filled with tears. "And for a girl?" "Grace," he said softly. Because grace is what we've been given, undeserved mercy, unearned second chances, love we didn't think we deserved. Grace is what pulled me out of darkness, what saved us both, what gave us this life." "Grace," Anna repeated, testing the name. "I love it. Grace Redden. Or Jacob Redden, if it's a boy. Either way, they'll be loved," Anna said firmly. "Loved and protected and taught that even when life is hard, even when terrible things happen, choosing love and hope and family is always worth it." The actual Jacob, listening from across the room where he was supposedly doing homework, spoke up. "You know I'm going to be insufferable if you name the baby after me, right?" "You're already insufferable," Anna replied sweetly, "but we love you anyway." Summer brought its own challenges. Anna grew huge, uncomfortable in the heat, tired of being pregnant and eager to meet their child. Caleb fretted constantly, watching her every move, driving her to distraction with his hovering concern. "I'm not made of glass," she snapped one particularly hot afternoon. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'll be fine." "I know you'll be fine," Caleb said, though his face suggested he believed no such thing. You just worry because that's what you do now. You've gone from the man who felt nothing to the man who feels everything, and you don't know how to find middle ground." She softened, taking his hand. "I appreciate the concern, truly, but you need to trust that I'm strong enough for this, that my body knows what to do, that we're going to be okay. What if something goes wrong? Then we face it together, just like we've faced everything else." She pulled him close, resting his hand on her enormous belly. "But nothing is going to go wrong. I feel it in my bones. This baby is meant to be here, meant to be ours. We've been tested enough. This time, everything is going to be perfect." She was right, though the labor when it came in late August was anything but easy. Anna's water broke just before dawn on a humid morning, and by the time Harrison arrived, she was already deep in labor's grip. Caleb wanted to be with her, wanted to hold her hand through the pain, but Harrison shooed him out of the room with stern instructions to boil water and stay out of the way. So he paced the main room with Jacob, both of them wincing at every cry from the bedroom, both of them feeling helpless and terrified. "Is it supposed to sound like that?" Jacob asked nervously after a particularly intense scream. "I have no idea," Caleb admitted. "But Harrison seems calm, so I'm trying to believe that's a good sign." Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, the day growing hot and sticky. Anna's labor continued, her cries weakening with exhaustion, and Caleb was seriously considering breaking down the door and demanding to be let in when he heard it. A baby's cry. Thin, outraged, absolutely perfect. Harrison appeared in the doorway, his face tired but smiling. "Congratulations, Redden. You have a son, strong, healthy, with an impressive set of lungs." Caleb couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stand there as the reality crashed over him. A son. He had a son. He was a father. "Can I—" His voice cracked. "Can I see them?" "Give us a few minutes to get cleaned up. Then, yes." Those few minutes felt like hours. Caleb stood frozen in the main room, Jacob beside him with tears running down his face, both of them waiting to meet the newest member of their family. Finally, Harrison opened the door and gestured them inside. Anna lay in the bed, exhausted but radiant, her hair damp with sweat and her face glowing with joy. And in her arms, wrapped in a blanket Anna had sewn months ago, was the smallest person Caleb had ever seen. His son. He approached the bed on unsteady legs, his vision blurring with tears he didn't try to hide. Anna smiled up at him, shifted the bundle in her arms, and said, "Caleb, meet Jacob. Jacob, meet your father." Caleb looked down at the tiny face, eyes scrunched shut, mouth opening in a yawn, one small fist waving in the air. Perfect. Absolutely perfect in every way. Jacob, he whispered, touching one impossibly small hand with one calloused finger. The baby's hand closed around his finger instinctively, and Caleb felt something break open in his chest. Not the cracking of stone this time, but the overflow of love so profound it physically hurt. Would you like to hold him? Anna asked. I don't know how. Neither did I until 10 minutes ago. We'll figure it out together. She showed him how to support the baby's head, how to cradle the tiny body against his chest. And when Caleb held his son for the first time, when he felt that small weight in his arms and looked down at the face that was somehow both his and Anna's combined, he wept. These weren't the bitter tears of loss that had defined so much of his life. These were tears of joy, gratitude, overwhelming love for this tiny person who already had complete power to destroy him, and somehow that was okay. Because this was what life was supposed to be, not avoiding pain, not hiding from feeling, but loving completely despite knowing how much it could hurt. Hello, Jacob, he whispered to his son. I'm your father. I'm going to mess up sometimes, going to make mistakes, going to have no idea what I'm doing most of the time. But I promise you this, I will love you with everything I am, will protect you, teach you, show you how to be a good man even though I'm still learning myself. And I will never, ever let you doubt that you are wanted, loved, and the best thing that ever happened to this broken-down bounty hunter. The older Jacob appeared beside the bed, looking down at his nephew with wonder. He's so small. You were that small once, Anna reminded him. Was I really? Jacob touched the baby's hand gently. Hey there, little guy. I'm your Uncle Jacob. We're going to have adventures together. I'll teach you to track, to ride, to be brave even when you're scared. And I'll tell you about your parents, about how your mother saved my life, about how your father rode through hell to save us both, about how they built this family through determination and love, and refusing to give up even when things seemed impossible. Caleb looked at Anna over their son's head, saw her crying happy tears, and felt something settle deep in his soul. This was it. This was what he'd been searching for through 10 years of emptiness, what he'd thought lost forever when Emily died, what he'd never believed he deserved. A family, a home, a future filled with love instead of loneliness, hope instead of despair, connection instead of isolation. The stone heart had been cracked completely open, and what emerged was something better than what had been there before. Not the naive boy who'd left Virginia with dreams of glory, not the cold hunter who'd spent years avoiding feeling, but a man who'd been broken and rebuilt, who'd learned that strength came from vulnerability, that courage meant loving despite the risk, that redemption was possible even for those who thought themselves beyond saving. Over the following weeks, they settled into the exhausting chaos of new parenthood. Baby Jacob, little Jake, they started calling him to distinguish from his uncle, demanded constant attention, nursing every few hours, crying for reasons they couldn't always decipher. Caleb discovered he was surprisingly competent at changing diapers, walking the floor at 3 a.m, while Anna got desperately needed sleep, singing lullabies in his rough voice that somehow soothed the baby when nothing else would. Jacob the elder took his role as uncle seriously, helping however he could, entertaining the baby with silly faces and songs, proving himself mature beyond his 13 years. They were exhausted, overwhelmed, occasionally frustrated beyond words, but they were also happier than any of them had ever been. One cool September evening, when Jake was finally sleeping after a particularly fussy day, Caleb stood on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie. Anna joined him, slipping under his arm, both of them savoring the rare moment of quiet. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" she asked softly. "All the impossible coincidences, the near misses, the moments that could have gone completely differently." "All the time," he admitted. "If I hadn't stopped in Redemption Creek that day, if I hadn't been in the saloon when you asked Patterson for help, if I'd ridden out the next morning like I'd planned, we never would have met," Anna finished. "Jacob would have died. I would have been alone, and you'd still be out there hunting men and pretending you didn't have a heart. Instead, I'm here, deputy sheriff, husband, father, living in a house I built with my own hands, raising a family I never thought I'd have." He pulled her closer. "Feels like a dream sometimes, Like I'm going to wake up and discover it was all my imagination, that I'm still that cold-hearted bounty hunter drinking himself to death in some saloon. It's not a dream, Anna said firmly. It's real. We're real. And we fought too hard for this life to let doubt steal it from us. She was right, of course. This was real. The house, the family, the love that had rebuilt him from the inside out. Real and precious and worth every moment of fear it brought. I love you, he said simply, because some truths were too important not to speak aloud. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. You saved me, Anna. Saved me from myself, from the stone heart that was killing me slowly. You and Jacob, and now little Jake, you're the reason I wake up every morning believing life is worth living. And you saved me, she replied. Saved me from loneliness, from believing I had to carry everything alone, from thinking I'd never find someone who saw me, really saw me, and chose to love what they found. She turned in his arms to face him. We saved each other, Caleb. That's what love does. It doesn't fix everything, doesn't make life easy or pain-free, but it gives you a reason to keep fighting, keep hoping, keep choosing joy, even when joy feels impossible. From inside, Jake began to cry, a thin, demanding wail that meant he was hungry and wanted attention immediately. Anna sighed but smiled. That's our cue. I'll get him, Caleb offered. You've been up with him all day. We'll both get him, Anna decided. We're in this together. Remember? They went inside together, moving toward their son's cries, and Caleb thought about how much his life had changed in just over a year. From the man who'd ridden into Redemption Creek with nothing but whiskey and emptiness, to the man who now had everything that mattered. The transformation hadn't been easy. He still had nightmares sometimes, still woke reaching for guns that weren't there, still struggled with the weight of love, with the constant fear that losing his family would destroy him more completely than any bullet ever could. The ghosts of his past hadn't disappeared. Emily still visited his dreams. His family's faces still haunted quiet moments. The men he'd killed still demanded accounting in the dark hours before dawn. But alongside the ghosts were new memories. Anna's smile, Jacob's laughter, Jake's tiny hand wrapped around his finger, the sound of his family moving through the house they'd built together. The knowledge that he'd been given something precious, something worth fighting for, something that made every risk worthwhile. As autumn deepened and the first frost painted the prairie silver, life continued its steady rhythm. Jake grew stronger, more alert, beginning to smile and coo at the faces above him. Jacob started his final year of school, already planning what he'd do after graduation. Maybe become a doctor like Harrison, maybe run the ranch with Caleb, maybe head to college back east if they could afford it. Anna returned to teaching part-time, bringing Jake with her to school, the children delighted to have a baby in their classroom. And Caleb continued his work as deputy, keeping peace in Redemption Creek, slowly building a reputation not as the cold-hearted bounty hunter, but as a fair lawman who understood that most people weren't entirely good or entirely bad, just complicated humans doing their best. One October afternoon, Sheriff Bridger called him into the office with news. Territorial governor's creating a new marshal service. Wants men he can trust, men with experience but also integrity. He asked me to recommend someone for this district. Bridger paused. I recommended you. Caleb's first instinct was to refuse. The last thing he wanted was more responsibility, more time away from his family, more danger. But then he thought about what the job would mean. Bringing law to places that had none, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, using his skills for something better than chasing bounties. I'll need to talk to Anna, he said finally. Of course. Job wouldn't start until spring anyway. Think about it, discuss it with your wife, let me know. Bridger leaned back in his chair. You're a good man, Caleb Redden. Took you a while to figure that out, but you got there eventually. Whatever you decide, I'm proud to have known you. That evening, Caleb told Anna about the offer over supper. She listened carefully, asked questions about the specifics, then set down her fork and looked at him directly. Do you want to do it? I don't know. Part of me does, feels like a chance to make a real difference, to do good work that matters. But part of me just wants to stay here, work the ranch, be with you and the boys. Don't want to risk what we've built. Life is always a risk, Anna said quietly. We learned that the hard way. But hiding from risk isn't the same as living. She reached across the table to take his hand. I trust you to make the right choice, whatever that is, and I'll support you either way, whether you take the job or turn it down. That's what partners do. Caleb thought about it over the following weeks, weighing duty against desire, opportunity against fear. He talked to Jacob, who thought having a marshal for a father would be amazing. He talked to little Jake, who couldn't answer but gurgled contentedly in his arms regardless. He talked to the ghosts that still visited sometimes, asking what they'd want for him, whether Emily would understand this new life he'd built. And finally, he made his decision. On a cold November morning, Caleb Redden stood in Sheriff Bridger's office and accepted the position of territorial marshal. It would mean travel sometimes, danger occasionally, time away from home that he'd rather spend with his family. But it also meant protecting people, bringing justice to places that desperately needed it, using his skills for good instead of just for money. You won't regret this, Bridger said, shaking his hand. You're exactly the kind of man this territory needs. Hope you're right, Caleb replied. Because if being a marshal means I miss too much of my sons growing up, Anna will shoot me herself. He wore the marshal's badge with pride, but also with the full understanding of what it represented. Not just authority, but responsibility. Not just power, but service. And he promised himself that no matter how difficult the job became, no matter how much danger he faced, he would never let it turn his heart back to stone. The cowboy's heart had been cracked open by love, and it would stay open. Vulnerable, yes. Capable of being hurt in ways that terrified him, absolutely. But also capable of joy, connection, purpose, all the things that made life worth living. Winter came again, their second winter as a complete family. On New Year's Day, exactly 1 year after their wedding, Anna and Caleb stood in the church while their friends and neighbors celebrated. Jake slept peacefully in Anna's arms, and Jacob stood beside Caleb with obvious pride. Hard to believe it's only been a year, Anna said softly, looking around at all the faces that had become family. Feels like we've lived a lifetime. We have, Caleb replied. Several lifetimes, actually. All of them leading to this moment. Reverend Matthews raised his glass in a toast. To the Redden family, proof that redemption is always possible, that love conquers even the hardest hearts, and that choosing hope over despair makes all the difference. May your second year together be filled with as much joy as your first. Everyone drank, and Caleb held Anna close, their son between them, Jacob's hand on his shoulder. This was his family, his redemption, his proof that even broken men could be rebuilt, that stone hearts could crack open, that love was always, always worth the risk. As the celebration continued around them, as friends laughed and children played and life went on in its beautiful, complicated way, Caleb thought about the journey that had brought him here. Every loss, every mistake, every dark year of emptiness had somehow been necessary to prepare him for this moment, this family, this life. He'd been broken by war and grief, had spent 10 years running from feeling anything at all, had built walls so high and thick that nothing could penetrate them. But Anna had seen past the walls to the man beneath, had refused to let him hide behind stone and coldness and careful distance. She'd cried in his arms, and those tears had cracked something fundamental inside him, had forced him to feel again, to care again, to risk his heart on the chance that love might be real and lasting and worth every moment of terror it brought. And in saving her brother, in building their home, in becoming a husband and father, Caleb had found the thing he'd been searching for without knowing it. Not just redemption, though he'd found that too, but purpose, meaning. A reason to wake up every morning and choose to live instead of just survive. The story could have ended differently, could have ended with Jacob dying in that cabin, with Caleb riding away from Redemption Creek and never looking back, with Anna alone and grieving and lost. Could have ended with any of 100 tragedies that had seemed inevitable at various points, but instead it ended here, with love and family and hope. With a man who'd thought himself beyond saving, proving that no one is ever truly beyond redemption. With a woman who'd lost everything, finding more than she'd ever dreamed possible. With a boy who'd nearly died twice, growing strong and healthy and surrounded by people who loved him. And with a baby who would grow up knowing only love, only safety, only the certainty that he was wanted and cherished. As midnight approached and the town prepared to ring in the new year, Caleb Redden stood on the church steps with his wife in his arms and his sons beside him, looking out over Redemption Creek with gratitude so profound it felt like prayer. He was home. Finally, completely, irrevocably home. Not just in a place, but in a life, in a family, in a heart that no longer needed to be stoned because it was surrounded by love strong enough to protect it. The church bells began to ring, marking the turn of the year, and across Redemption Creek people cheered and embraced and welcomed the future with hope. Caleb kissed Anna as the bells rang, and over the noise he whispered the truth they'd both learned through trial and terror and tremendous joy. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything. For seeing me when I was invisible, for loving me when I was unlovable, for teaching me that hearts don't have to be stoned to survive the world's cruelty. Thank you for giving me a life worth living." Anna smiled through happy tears. "Thank you for being brave enough to let me, for choosing to stay when running would have been easier, for becoming the man I always knew you could be." And there, under the Montana stars with snow falling soft and white around them, the reformed bounty hunter held his family close and understood what redemption truly meant. Not forgetting the past, not pretending the scars had disappeared, but choosing to build something new despite the pain. Choosing to love despite the risk. Choosing to believe that even stone hearts could crack open and bloom into something beautiful. The cowboy's heart had turned to stone until she cried in his arms and cracked it open. And what emerged from that cracking was not just a man, but a father, a husband, a protector, a human being fully alive to every joy and sorrow life offered. Caleb Redden had been given a second chance he never expected and absolutely didn't deserve, and he would spend the rest of his days proving himself worthy of the gift. Inside the church, the celebration continued. Outside, snow fell on Redemption Creek, blanketing the town in white. And in the arms of his family, surrounded by love, Caleb Redden finally understood what it meant to be home. Not just in a place, but in a life. Not just surviving, but truly, deeply, joyfully alive. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.